Right. Hawkins, nice to have you on our podcast, brother.
So,
It's also weird people calling you by your artist name, Hawkins, all the time, or
I don't think a lot of people call me by my artist name.
yeah,
It is my last name though.
Yeah,
So I have a hyphenated last name, and Hawkins is the first part of that.
mm,
Yeah. So I'm not unfamiliar with it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel weird when people refer to you there. Or it's Mr. Hawkins.
to be
Hey, it's
honest-
Mr. Hawkins at school, right?
No, it's Mr. Salter at school,
Oh, okay.
so that my students can't find my my other name. Yeah, but Hawkins, I don't know. Like it's I don't think I've had the experience of being called by it many times because I really only just started using it last year as an artist name. Yeah, before that I just went by my name. And
why the change from using Victor and
yeah, because I needed a name to represent or to establish like the original, separate the original music from like the cover and band work stuff I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it can be confusing because some people just they're not sure whether I'm. I guess they're not really sure what they're hiring, or what they're asking for. So Hawkins was a good way of establishing,
separating the before or the stuff that you used to do and all the original stuff that you do now.
And the other side of it is that I get to make use of a name that I have or that I carry that doesn't get used often. Quite often people will just take the last part of the name and use that because Hawkins Sulphur can be a bit of a handful, and also quite often it gets said incorrectly anyway. So just to avoid confusion, Hawkins was what I went with, yeah.
So you know that process, was it a big deal? Because man, it's like I remember like if you watch movies like The Bumper and Richie Valens had to change his name.
Yeah.
To Richie Valens, you know, like because it's sort of like I don't know, the record labels back in the day they change your name for the audience and stuff.
The reason, like, if you hear the background to that was because he was Latino, so they, his real name was Valenzuela.
Yeah.
So they knew that it wasn't a radio, back in the mid-60s and that. But there wouldn't be any issue now, though,
Oh, yes and no. Like the reality with people like Richie Valens and a lot of like the Hollywood celebrities of that time was that they had entire PR teams and entire teams that were creating. It wasn't just their name, it was like the backstory was usually completely made up. And they did that so that the name was easier to remember, and also that it was separate to somebody who may have already held that name or something similar. And I think you find issue with that now because, say, for example, in New Zealand, Hawkins is a construction company that everybody knows, but Hawkins also, if you were to search Hawkins, like, say, in just Spotify, you're going to come up with a lot of them. And
I think Sophie B. Hawkins came up on my search list when I typed
Sophie B. Hawkins is great. Yeah. Not related at all, but yeah, she's great. But that's what I mean. Like they kind of tried to go for, back then especially, it was more important about creating a celebrity name and then a name that couldn't be sourced. So for example, Richie Valens, if you look at his name, because that name is a created one, they could create an entire backstory, and that backstory could be whatever they gave you, especially before social media, whatever they gave you, that was it. Yeah, so you find a lot of people that have names that have no actual history for them, other than what the labels created. But I'm independent, so I do it myself. And Hawkins was just, like, I think Victor is not that easy to remember, considering, I spent most of my life being called Vincent by other people, because they hear it, they go, oh yeah, and then they just call you by another name. So at least that one is a little easier to remember. Yeah.
I just want to say congratulations on the release of your album,
Thank you.
debut album.
Yeah.
Hey, man, I was listening to it all day today at work, just get a feel. But man, man, I like 3 songs stood out for me,
Yeah.
and one of them was Fireflies.
Cool.
And do you like that one? Because man,
Yeah, I like all of
that's
them.
amazing. I know, but I don't know if others have like the favorites. They always have
Yeah,
their favorites,
yeah.
and then they go down the list. And
Yeah.
but yeah, that one stood out for me, and there were a couple others too, like Rumors.
Yeah.
That was a good one. I like that one.
Yeah.
And what was
Yeah.
the official release date that you?
March 26th.
Okay,
this
was there
year.
a significance in that date, or
Nah.
that was just a?
So, when did I start? Like mid-January 2019, I started recording the album. And I wasn't going to tell anybody, so I self-funded the whole thing, so I was recording it just so that I made one, because I was getting older, and I guess, like, when you get older, or at least for me, when I got older, it was starting to become this thing where my ideals and what I wanted to achieve and what I wanted to do were shifting or changing, and making an album I always wanted to do, but I was getting to this age where I was kind of like not fussed if I did it or not. And then I kind of realized I'd made every excuse not to do it, so I might as well just try it and just jump in. But I didn't want to play the whole I'm a solo artist game, so I just made sure that I could fund it myself. And as a result, I had a really nice slow process of creating these songs and getting the people I wanted in, and getting things like strings and brass, which a lot of people don't do these days, live instruments. And then COVID came, so we were meant to release it in, I think it was January. The original release was meant to be January of 2000. Yeah, 2020, sorry. And things just got too late. The people I was working with, I was unrealistic. I thought I was going to release it in 3 months from January 2019, and then that became 6 months, and then we were like, let's just release it in January, and then it just wound up being a single in February, and then lockdown. Yeah. That big grey space that happened, and then it was COVID, and then it wound up being March 26th, because it was just
during that time that we you said the grey period
Yeah.
during COVID, did you come off any songs during that period that you added to the?
No.
Yeah, so everything was written before then.
Yeah, everything was written before then. What they became was, some of them stayed pretty faithful to the demo, and some of them changed drastically. It was good that I had the time to do that too. COVID was actually a blessing in that sense of actually being able to go back and listen to things a lot and go, is this what I actually want this to sound like? Because that was the main goal, was just to create something that I loved. And that, if I didn't do anything else and I looked back on it maybe 10 years later, I'd still be okay with it and not feel like, that's cheesy, or I wish I had done something else. Yeah, so they were carefully chosen.
How many songs out of the songs that you chose for the album? How many?
Yeah. So they were initially. Sorry, I have hay fever. Can I just get that drip there? There were initially 16 songs, and that tapered down to 12. I did write throughout that process as well, but I committed to just getting those songs, and then it just worked out like it was going to be easier to do 12, because, as I said, I hadn't planned on releasing it, or I was going to release it but tell nobody about it and just leave it, like it was my little sort of secret there. But then the 16 songs tapered down to 12 because I started doing videos. I started, the goalposts moved a little more, and I wanted to try other things, and they all cost money. And so then by the end of it was just 12 songs. But 12 songs that I'm proud of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It's pretty cool how you because I read that you directed your first video, the one with the
yeah.
with
The
there's
beach.
multiple selves of you coming out of.
Oh, yeah,
your-
that's the fourth video.
Oh, fourth video.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I directed the first 4, and then the last 2 that had just been released was a guy, Corey Fleming, did them.
Mm.
Yeah, and I just was on the creative team for that. But,
Sorry. You know, with your videos, you know how you said you directed your first 4. Did you have any influences, or did you watch past videos and go, like, I'm going to take bits of this one, or I've been, you know, when we talk about music videos, you think of Hype Williams and all this, you know, there's those guys who used to do the big American, and then we have the one that done all the New Zealand, you know, the Day Hamo, what was his name? Sorry,
Christopher. Was it Christopher?
Yeah,
Something.
he's the one that done all the big Day Hamo.
Chris Graham.
Chris Graham. So, you know, and he done the Scribe. Did you get any influence from everywhere, or did you just organically just sit down and write and then think, this is what I envisioned with the song?
yeah.
Or are you a movie buff and you learn from that?
Yeah, but probably different movies to what everybody else is into. I went with concepts more than actually being influenced by other music videos that were created. There were things that I always wanted to try in a music video. That was usually how I orchestrated them, but I was always stressed through the process of making those 4 videos. When it came to having somebody else direct, I started to realize a lot of what I was doing wrong.
Mm.
You know, it doesn't have to be a stressful process, and I actually really liked being part of the creative side of it. Yeah, so the one with the cloning, which is the 7 versions of me, yeah, that whole concept came from just like how we wear different hats throughout our day, and you know, we have different roles, and actually COVID influenced that in the sense of, because I'm a teacher, high school teacher, and when you have to teach in lockdown, you realize, or you become very aware that your students on the other side are now at home and they have different roles. So say, for example, if they're in a Pacific or Maori family household and they're one of the older kids, you automatically know that they're now the babysitters. They're now responsible for making sure that the other siblings are attending classes and they might not attend, or they might be old enough to work and they're sent off to work to help out with the pressures of being in lockdown. And then they become essential workers and they have a different experience. And so it's that Can't Leave It Alone, which was that song, was all about like the judgment that you face from other people, and especially keyboard warriors, and how it's so easy to just look at one aspect of somebody's life and decide that that's who they are, what they are, and pass your judgment over what they're doing. And in reality, there's like 6 other roles that they have that they're trying to fulfill at that same time, and you've dismissed all of them just to have your opinion hold some weight. And that's the kind of danger of anonymous judgment, is that you only pass judgment on what you know or what you think you know, instead of actually knowing the bulk of the person, the weight of the person.
Is that through experiences through your kids at school, or a personal experience, or
with
the like keyboard warrior stuff in the?
Yeah, so I've experienced it a lot, because I did shucks, how long? Like 15 years ago, I think I did New Zealand Idol, and I got to the top 10. And back then, I was just the kid that wanted to sing. You know, I had no perception whatsoever of what TV was, or what being in front of people really meant. Some people really were really beautiful. They loved what I did, but you're under a microscope, and so I was pulled up for things that are completely out of my control. For example, kind of what we were talking about before with the whole Richie Valens thing. Like, I was branded as the shy guy. I'm not shy. I'm introverted, so I have a tendency to keep to myself.
That's
But I
common
think-
among others, say, like
Yeah,
introverts.
to an extent, yeah. Well, you're in a situation where you're always constantly in front of people, and you have to behave a certain way. And when you start to sort of digress or you go outside of that, people start to make up their own minds about why you're like that. And one perception, quite a common one, is that because you weren't super excited about an interaction you had with them, that you're a snob. And it's not. It's like, just imagine being at work all day and then finally getting your break or whatever, and your boss says, nah, work through.
Mm.
There's this hesitance or this reluctance to do it, especially if you needed that break. And you kind of push through it, but you push through it with your teeth sort of gritting, you know, like there's this thing of like, I would really like to talk to you, and I would really like to have this interaction with you, but I don't have anything else left to give. And it's like, you've just caught me now at this time where I get one moment to breathe. And you learn, as you get older, I guess you learn to sort of put that aside and do that, you know. I think a lot of people learn that when they have kids. That, you know, even if they're just having a bad day in front of their kids, it's really important to just do what's necessary for them. And for me, it was that kind of thing of, although I've been working, their experience has only just begun with me, and so they want to take more, or they want more from that interaction. So I've become a little more aware of the fact that I've not stopped working just because I've jumped off stage or whatever. And that's with the keyboard warriors though, it's out of your control. Some people just
Just
want
negative.
to be hurtful.
Yeah.
Because it's whatever you can say it's because they want to feel better about themselves, but you don't know that, and it's just a judgment that you're passing. In the same way that they're passing it on you. You don't know why they think that way. And it's just not worth questioning it, you know.
You know, like how you said 15 years ago when you came on New Zealand Idol, if we moved it to now, would you have been able, especially the climate or the way that these cyber bullies or these trolls, do you think you would have been able to handle it now? Because it's kind of, you know, you're talking about that experience then, but right now it's magnified, you know, by 100, you know.
Yeah, I think it's only magnified because people are talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Back then, you know, we're talking like mid-2000s. Mid-2000s is still the era of hard enough and get over it, you know? Like, we didn't, if you even cast your minds back to like, say, 2005 and pre-2005, I don't remember anything about mental well-being. I don't remember anything about online safety or even just information being out there. Like, be careful what you put out there. You know, like, people are there's the whole cancel culture thing now, and there's the whole people being reprimanded for something that they said when 12 years ago, you know, and you don't necessarily think the same as you did 12 years ago, and you're not the same person that you were 12 years ago. But that's what I mean about people wanting to have that extra interaction with you. If they can't find it, they'll go back, and when they go back, they start looking at things like, you said this about these people, and then they don't want you to clarify, they want you to make it present. So instead of asking you what you meant or what was it that made you do that, it becomes this thing of, you said this one time and therefore this is what you are, and we should get rid of you. But yes, I got a whole lot of things 15 years ago, and honestly, if I was 15 years ago and I had that experience and then I did it again now, which I wouldn't do, I'd be able to handle it a lot better because of things I am sure of within myself. I can't be bothered. Like, I don't have that time for it anymore. If somebody was like, oh, you're a faggot or something like that, I'd be like, well, what can I do? Like, that sort of stuff that would be the stuff that came up, like, you know, and I'd just be, now I wouldn't care.
Give it the
you
time,
know?
yeah.
You know, like that probably sounds quite harsh to say, but the reality is that it just doesn't bother me. It bothers them, and that's on them. And I know that that's like, you know, but what other people think of you is none of your business. So I just tend to just be like, oh well, that's what you think.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to unpack what you just said, because it's basically what everyone goes through these days, you know. And I think what you said about back in the days when no one ever heard of mental health, you know, there's no instruction book, nothing, no conversations about it. All we saw was the back end of it, which was probably suicide.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of it back then.
Yeah.
I know there was a lot of it around when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And it probably still is there, but with the internet now and, you know, social media and everything, it's just blown up to extreme levels now, you know.
And glorified to some extent. It's like this interesting thing of, if you were dealing with suicide back then, and say it was your best mate that committed suicide, and you were male especially, nobody came to check on you to see if you were okay. Like, you lost one of the boys, but nobody came to check on you, you know. And nowadays, it's all about like, man, we've got to check on the people closest to them, because we realise now that these they're not just these cardboard cutouts of people, but they are actually what happened to that person by cause and effect has created this thing within you, and you could be really angry at the world. There's a lot of things, and like, I'm not qualified to talk about that stuff necessarily, but I think a lot of us have had that experience and then had to go through dealing with somebody's suicide or dealing with loss on our own, and sort of speculating what that means for us, and as a result probably have damaged ourselves a bit from not being able to talk about it, and have to be really mindful of not passing that on to other generations. Like, even I catch myself sometimes telling kids in a roundabout way, like, I don't tell them to harden up, but in a roundabout way I'm like, oh, it's not that big a deal, and then I'm like, well, maybe it is for them, I don't know. Like, I didn't ask them, I just decided, you're just whining, or it's not a big deal. And I have to be really careful of that, especially in my profession, that I'm not just putting that on somebody because I want them to put their problems aside or their issues aside, because you're actually asking them to put themselves aside. And no person should feel dismissed in that sense, you know.
It's funny how, you know, it was interesting when you said, you know, 15 years ago we did have that, there was that harden up mentality, like, because we come from that generation of, it had always been the, you know, be the tough guy, and we never really talked about it. And I don't think it was until, I think, when John Kerwin started, when people started talking openly about mental health. Because I know, as a Pacific Islander, we never, I wouldn't say it was taboo, but we never talked about our feelings like that, because of, you know, our older generation, that wasn't something that was ever talked about. So
I feel like the kids today, like the new generation coming up, because the narrative is about these days about mental health and suicide and talk to your mate and all that. They're growing up into it, so they get it. Do you see that with your kids at school and stuff?
I think I see a lot of children that are desensitized, in the sense of, I recall suicide or losing a loved one as being a huge loss. You know, like, it would impact, even though going through it alone, like, somewhat, it was something that was really hard to make sense of. And some of my students talk about it like it's just the same as, like, deciding what you're having for lunch. And it's that desensitized nature towards, I guess, what they experience in the landscape they now have, which is completely different to ours back then. Because what I do remember about mental illness back then, even with John Kerwin, and I mean, I had my own, not mental illness, but I had my own issues with basically like broken mentality. I remember that there was an ad that used to come on and showed celebrities that suffered from some type of mental illness, and I remember John Kerwin talking about it back in the day, and he's been talking about it for a long time. And I remember Mike King's Nutters Club, but I also recall not really having any prior understanding of what that was enough to want to understand what they were talking about or what those ads were about. And it was through, I think, like as you get older and you become interested in certain media, that I became more interested in or invested in what that was. Like, I think A Beautiful Mind was the first time I might have actually acknowledged what schizophrenia is, and I had a cousin who had schizophrenia, but I didn't pair them up as being the same illness, if that's what it's branded as. I never paired that up as being the same thing. It took quite a bit of understanding. You know, I have a nephew who's autistic, and I didn't really understand autism. I just understood that there were different processes that I had to go through in order to connect with him than, say, his siblings, who didn't have anything that was foreign to me, you know. And now there's like this whole wealth of education there, but I still find my generation and older generations unwilling to tap into it, and yet we're the ones that are responsible for, and I'm just talking about the people around me, like we're the ones responsible for raising these generations, and we can't even build up enough of a vocabulary for ourselves to build a vocabulary for them, so they're kind of desensitized to the whole idea of, oh yeah, you're ADHD, you're just hyper, you know. And it's like, no, there's like a lot more, and this ADHD kid over here and this ADHD kid over here are not the same. They're not in the same basket just because they both have ADHD. Like, it can manifest in so many different ways. Yeah, so I find that students now, especially my students, it kind of just washes over them a lot of the time. But they are a lot more invested in how they feel, you know. They do quite often express a lot easier than I ever remember my experience in high school being,
Yeah. Resilience is a word that comes up to that sort of like takes care of all that mental health stuff for people, you know, when they talk about resilience.
Yeah.
Like, do you think there's a lack of that now? And is it because of the internet and social media and just the way society is? And is it because society doesn't know how to control these things? Because we're just taking it as it comes. And
it's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. But I don't know. I don't think we have the answers for it. That's all. But
to be honest, like, I always have an issue in the education system when they talk about resilience, because resilience is not a blanket thing, and it's not specifically like case by case thing. Like, if you were to ask people, you know, go person to person and ask them what being resilient meant, you're going to have a different answer, because they'll apply it to generally first their own life. And then they might apply it to people, what they want for other people in their lives. But what they want for other people might not be what they want for themselves. So it becomes a fluid thing where it's like, is resilience something where you learn to deal with and self-manage yourself enough that you don't talk, or you don't need to lean on somebody or rely on somebody? Because we came from a thing where it was like, group work is really important, let's all be in a group, and then kind of starting to realize, oh wait, some people don't like to work in a group, they work really well on their own, and then putting them into a group, you're just like, just be resilient, just get through this, you know. And it's like, what are you actually doing to them by doing that, and what does that mean for them? Because being resilient will take on a different persona for them, as it will, say, somebody who really does enjoy group work and does enjoy being social. And you can't, I can't answer that, to be fair. Again, very not qualified to answer that. But it is a word that's used a lot, especially in education, and especially towards kids. We need to build more resilient kids. It's like resilient. Hold on. Resilient in the sense of like a landscape that, to be honest, as an adult, I don't understand. The landscape that they grow up in. Yeah, I participated, and I'm on social media, and I do certain things that they do, but I wouldn't know how to tell them to be resilient, because I'm a very private person in a lot of aspects of my life, and the way that I do that is by being private or keeping private. That's not the same as what they're going through. So I don't necessarily have an answer. It's a psychotherapist here who might, but I don't have it.
Well, what is your resilience may actually be your dismissiveness or suppression.
Yeah. Yes.
In reality.
In reality.
Take that out there.
But yeah, that's...
Well, I'm sure we started on the album.
yeah.
This is the tangent we were talking about, James. James, this is the tangent we're talking about.
And we started on the release date, and then we've gone right across. But that's what. Yeah.
To be fair, though, like that is part of my. I mean, part of my, for lack of a better word, like toolbox. Of resilience is writing songs. I like to write out or write away things, put it on paper. If it's something hurtful and I put it on paper and I put it in a song, then it doesn't hurt me as much anymore, because I've told somebody. It's just not a physical body, and then when it's played in front of somebody, or somebody feels that way, I'm not necessarily trying to relate to them. It's definitely all about me when I'm singing it and writing it. But there is that connection, because people desire connection, and so
it's a human trait.
Yeah. So when they hear the song and they go, "Oh, I really love this song," and they take that upon themselves, they're taking it upon themselves for what. From their angle, and that's more important than what I thought about the song in the first place, and that's kind of what I've learned about music, even when I'm doing covers, is that once I've put it out there, it becomes theirs, and it no longer is mine. What happened in that moment was mine, but what I gave and what was heard out there, that belongs to them. And so I wouldn't dismiss somebody's interpretation of what the song meant to them, because they're just words, and what they put behind those words belongs to them, and that's as valid as what I wrote and how I wrote it and for what reason I wrote it. And yeah, there's a lot of songs that will never ever be heard, but I write. That's how I learned to deal with a lot of what I was going through internally, was to write, and then it's like kind of trapped in this Pandora's box, and when I open it, all hell breaks loose, like sometimes I'll read something and I'll be like, man, I was really going through something there, or I remember and I actually go through it. When I have to sing those songs, I am able to visit that place, but not in a place where I stay there and then it hurts more thereafter. I can just sort of go back to it, and I've had experiences. There's an entire EP that was in production of being released, and I had a band, and one of our band members died of cancer, and after that I couldn't sing those songs anymore, so I just left them alone. And then I tried to revisit one in COVID, and I started crying through it, and I just turned everything off, and I was like, I can now listen to these songs, but trying to recreate them, as it's not possible for me yet. Like, I'm not in a place where I've become emotionally capable enough to do this without going back and just remembering the part that hurts the most about that whole situation. So it's tied to that death. Yeah.
So does that stop you from writing those lyrics, or?
Well, I had written them. They had been written.
So I'm just saying, like, so every song is it like, so every song that you've ever written, is it as invested? Because you have these other songwriters that kind of write for other people, and so every song that that's on the on the album, every song that you've ever written, is it as invested?
This album, yeah. I actually went through a series on Instagram where I explained what each song was about to me and like where it came from, who it was influenced by. When I did the album, because I wasn't planning to do any more than that at the time, I chose songs that were influenced by the music I loved growing up. So Fireflies, for example, was actually Prince and Mariah Carey. Specifically like Mariah Carey mid-90s, when she started to use heaps of layering and textures for backing vocals and stuff like that, and just random parts that were coming in and out. But it was also based on like a lot of the stuff that Prince did in the early to mid-80s with how he was constructing songs.
I can hear that. Hear that in the beginning.
So that's like they're two major influences in music for me.
So how did you write that song? Because that's one of my favorite songs on your album, Fireflies. So can you talk about the process on that one?
Yeah. So I read a lot, and when I read a lot of classical literature, and I read a lot of medical journals, and I read a lot of research papers. So I did, part of my degree was anthropology, which is like study of civilizations. I get really into that. And I, for whatever reason, went on a tangent, decided to have a look at, I had these bits of words in my head that were just going round and round about fireflies. And then I also had like this whole idea of somebody waiting in the dark, and just being like lit up, but the only person in the crowd that was lit up, but they're completely enshrouded by darkness, and you can see all these shadows. And that was where the imagery for Fireflies came. Like the first line is, she's waiting in the background and there will be more. So then I actually started reading about fireflies, and they only light up for two predominant reasons. One is to warn predators that they're toxic, and the other one is to find a mate. And often once they've found their mate, like a lot of insects, they sort of have this moment together and then they're just gone, and the light extinguishes. And then there was another predatory type of firefly species that is larger, and it attracts smaller species basically to eat them, so it's this whole web of why they light up. And that song in itself was about addiction, and consumerism, the way none of the what some people will consider at one point in their lives the glitzy things in life, drinking, clubbing, going out with your mates, and some people to some extent trying drugs and doing all of those things. Very few people do it in the light. It's always something that's done in the dark. But there's always some reason for it, and that reason is always quite well lit as to why they do it. So it's a seduction, and you'll know people that are like, oh no, it's all good. Like I only do it on weekends, or they'll say things like that. But reality is, it's every weekend over how many years, and sometimes they'll do it on a weekday, or maybe they have a holiday, and then it's just like a big bender and whatever. Like, it's not just addiction to drugs and alcohol, but addiction to the way we get addicted to people, and it consumes our entire life, and we shut everybody else out. So it's this whole thing of
That sounds like my 20s.
but it is that thing, like it was definitely my 20s, you know, like it's that thing of the Fireflies. It's that larger thing that's pulling you towards it, and it looks beautiful, and you take or you participate in it, and it can either completely consume you or it can make you very scared. But it's always there, and it's always in the dark, and you know where to access it because there's a little light there, you know. And if you go too far towards it, you're going deeper and deeper into it. But the thing is, the idea of them, all these people being in the shadows, is all the people that are doing, you know, what's done in the shadows, you know. So it's like that whole thing of hiding that side of yourself, and that actually feeds into the addiction of it because you feel like you have to hide it. It creates excitement, you know, when something's hidden.
Yeah.
And a lot of us have those stories as well, where it's like, you know, we may have done something on Saturday and then gone straight to church in the morning with sunglasses, sat at the back, and
That's like my 20s.
but it's all of those things. You
Yeah.
can become addicted to people. And it's a seduction.
Yeah.
You don't actually know. Addiction doesn't become addiction until you no longer realize that it's something that you can control.
Shucks, look at this deep.
That's what Fireflies was about.
There's another Firefly song, but I don't think it was as deep as that one.
Oh, I like that song.
But
Yeah.
not as layered as that one. You know, I was introduced to you because I think that you done a live session for Radio New Zealand.
No, I didn't
Oh,
do
who
it
was
for
the-
Radio New Zealand. I did it for myself.
Oh, well, I saw the video,
Yeah,
and that's so I was, you know, I think it was on Instagram,
yeah,
and I clicked on it only because, you know, I thought, you know, it suggests stuff, and I watched
Yeah.
it, and it was Lost Ones. And
Yeah.
you know, when I heard the first bit, and I went, man, this feels like this, like, because I'm a open souls,
yeah,
and when I heard the brass and everything, and then
Yeah.
what really caught me, you know, besides your voice, was the people, or the people in the band and the girls that you had.
Yeah.
Because you know, when you have mainstream stuff and they have the certain looks in there, and I thought,
Yeah.
oh, this is someone that's just singing for his friends. You know, that's what
Yeah.
that's the vibe that I got from that
That's-
song, and I love the song.
yeah. Thank you. That's exactly what the album was. It was a massive love project. So everybody who worked on the album, I know, I love, and I wanted them on it. And if I could have fit everybody on there, I would have everybody on there, but I only had 12 songs. So how that happened was we were meant to do a live, like, sort of pre-album release introduction to the album. And then when lockdown happened, all of the bookings got pulled forward, and then, like, there was a lot of venues closed down, a lot of venues just took what work they could, and then there was, like, nowhere to gig. And that was the first lockdown, got lifted, and we got down to, I think, level 2. And it was like, you can have 10 people, and we were like, let's just go into studio. Because we were recording the live instrumentation, so the strings, the horns, and the band that day. And we're like, let's just go in and we'll get cameras and we'll record this, and we'll just have it purely live, because we can't get a live venue. And then, yeah, we recorded. That was like a 10-hour day, and that recording was done in an hour. 3 songs. And RNZ did premiere it,
Yeah.
but it wasn't an RNZ outfit, because they also have, you know, where you go to RNZ.
Yeah,
and you record
that's
it.
why I thought it was an R&Z produced thing, because of, like, the quality of it. Because I watched the ones that they had with who's the biggest band at the moment besides
Or LAB.
LAB.
Yeah.
And so I saw their live stuff, and then when I saw that, I went, oh, shucks, just another R&Z, because I love watching the
Yeah,
R&Z
they
stuff.
do great
because they
stuff,
really
yeah.
highlight, you know, New Zealand artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was just me being like, let's try and make the most of this, and it became a live EP. Yeah, 3 songs that are also on the album, but the recordings are slightly different. The main thing about those ones was we wanted, this is the team, like, wanted it to be completely live, so that's exactly what it would sound like live.
Yep.
Like there's no overdubbing, there's no it hasn't gone back into the studio to fix parts up. That didn't happen. Everybody was plugged into separate channels, and sometimes you'll hear it. Like Christian did really well. Christian Mulsey as the producer, he did really, really well on like trying to limit certain things. Like when you're in that space and you have drums, and then you have singers singing mics, their mics are picking up certain drum sounds. So he had to get rid of what you call bleeding, which is when like a sound, so like my voice will be picking up in your mics as well as this mic, and that's bleeding, and to clean it up it takes a long time.
Damn.
But that was the whole kaupapa of it, was for it to be completely live, and to then be able to use it as like, this is what it sounds like live.
Kind of like an ad, kind of like putting it out there, like,
Yeah,
this
they
is what
call
you'll
it
get if you come in.
press kit. That's what they
Okay.
call it, is like a press kit. You know, it's like a sort of thing that you release to media or to festivals, and you say this is what we do. It does help sometimes to have an audience, but obviously we could only have 10 people, and that was about as much as was in the room at the time. Yeah, there were 7 of us in this side and then 3 of them on the other side, on the engineering side. Yeah, but that was heaps of fun.
Those live video, you see them all everywhere, like on YouTube and that, like
Yeah,
the tiny disc,
Yeah.
the tiny disc one,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
yeah.
I think New Zealand Herald has one too. They have the Herald.
Right.
What?
New Zealand Herald have a live
I haven't seen
music
the,
thing too.
I haven't seen them one, so.
Yeah. I reckon those are pretty cool. Those are really cool.
Yeah, Tiny Desk is amazing.
Yeah, that's
especially because it's like, it is unapologetically live. You see, I get irritated personally with a lot of the things that are algorithm based, because there's a lot of sites and channels that are making things for the algorithm, and quite often you'll see people singing and they've got their headphones on and they've got their mic on and they're singing and they're doing all these live things, and to an untrained ear, which is a lot of people, it's majority of people, they go, oh yeah, that's really good, man, it's so live, and they're really feeling it. And it's like they're lip syncing.
Yeah.
They're overdubbed, they've gone back into studio, they've clipped this, they've re-sung this line over and over again until they got the perfect take. And then you're hearing all the tuning as well, like you're getting all that like that sort of stuff happening, and you're like, but the reality is that like they've done that so that when you listen to it back, you go, oh, they're really singing live and they're giving it everything. And then if all somebody needs to do is actually just look up like a live performance of them singing in some random place, and then you start to hear the imperfections. And the issue with that is that the imperfections are sometimes, people feel cheated after that if they do bother to look at it, and they go, oh, they don't sound as good as they did in their other, whereas you've got vocalists who are like Jasmine Sullivan, for example, who can basically sing what she does on record, and when you hear the imperfections in her singing live, they're not blatant enough for you to be like, oh, she's cheated us. Like you're just like, oh yeah, that is pretty close to what she sounds like, and that's the reality. Is there are a lot of channels now that rely heavily on technology, and they use technology to promote themselves, which on one side is really awesome, and on the other side it's putting a lot of artists out of, like, they just walk away from music. It's the same in other fields as well, like all the food hack things. Like there's a lot of chefs who had tried to start channels where they're making food for people, so that just regular people can make them, but then you've got this person that's like, yeah, just put this and this and this, and then put 2 minutes in the microwave, and then it makes this thing, and it doesn't.
That's right.
And if you're used to film, you start to see where they clipped and edited and pasted things together. But for the general population, they look at it and they go, oh yeah, I'll try this, and then they accept that what they pulled out of the microwave might taste good or might taste okay, but it went wrong because they did something wrong.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
the actual fact, like, it's the people who created the content that lied to you, and now you just feel like, oh, I didn't get it right. I must have done something wrong in the steps or the process. Yeah, so the whole Lost Ones doing the live thing was, let's just make it purely live. And I've noticed a trend of that coming back, where people are now just trying to sing live, even to the point of like, if the song is really difficult, they'll take the key down, you know? And that's not cheating either, like taking a key down because it's too hard to do the studio version. It's a frequency thing. That's a science, you know? Our ears like things that sound on the edge, but that's not necessarily always possible for you to recreate live. And if you think about like singers, say you've had a hard day or hard night, you went out, you had a few with somebody, and then you wake up in the morning, your voice, even just for talking, doesn't feel great. And for singers, when they don't feel optimum, like they still have to sing.
Yeah.
And they sing with whatever they have. And sometimes that's not going to mean that they can sing it in the key or sing exactly note for note what they want to do. Most famous singers do it as well. It's like they take keys down for that purpose, so that they don't destroy their voices. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate artists singing live, like live performances, like these days. I remember when I was a kid, like I was so used to buying my tapes and playing music. There's always the studio versions, right?
Yeah.
And then when I hear them on TV doing lives, I'll be like, oh, that doesn't sound like the studio version.
Yeah.
I don't want to listen to it.
Yeah.
This is different. But that's because I was just a kid and didn't appreciate, you know.
Yeah.
But when I did later on, and then people starting to mime, hey, or lip sync, you're just like, oh shit.
That's you know, that's when you really appreciate like singers like Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
And because there was that phase, that boy band phase, and the Britney Spears phase where when they'd get caught up because the CD started skipping in there, and then you'd realise, oh, it isn't actually, you know, and plus the Milli Vanilli stuff would have brought it to light that,
Yeah.
you know, and that's why I think when I really fell in love with live music, there was the MTV Unplugged, they had the Uptown one with Jodeci.
Yeah.
And, you know, and when you hear that, there's a difference when you hear something live. Because we took so we had Eddie Twala, he was in a Samoan, like I was telling you before.
Yeah.
And we were talking about live music. When you hear a drum hit or a piano or someone playing a guitar, it's a different kind of feeling when you hear it.
Yeah. TV depends a lot on compression, and it depends a lot on filtered sounds. So you don't get the feeling you would if you were at a live venue hearing live music. And the funny thing is, or what you may have noticed, is that sometimes when you are in front of somebody and hearing them live, you're like, man, this is amazing. And then you hear something recorded back, even if it's just on somebody's phone, and you're like, oh, that's not what I heard. But it's because you're picking up all the other frequencies that your ears like. When it's live, you like those frequencies. You like feeling bass. When it's in the studio, you don't necessarily appreciate that. There's something called ear fatigue, or listening fatigue. Your ears get tired. So somebody's constantly like singing in their high register and they're just going for it and they're belting. Eventually you're just going to get over that because you just want them to bring it down for just a little bit, give your ears a rest, and then get back into it. The difference between singers, and it's not all singers, this is where I'm talking about content versus actual, like, what we would consider musical genius or whatever, like, is that they heavily rely on a perfect vocal, which is why now a lot of people do dubs, where they come in, they sing a line, they sing the low lines, and then when it gets up into the super high parts, they start lip syncing. Some of that to me is acceptable. Like, I always, like, I'm a big Mariah Carey fan, and a lot of people go, oh yeah, she's always lip syncing now. I'm like, bro, but she sang like a beast for
that's right,
years and years and years. And in those days, the labels used to work them like crazy. nowadays a lot of artists have agency over saying when and what they want to do. But back then it was like, no, you do this interview, then you go here, then you got to be in studio. She released an album every year. Every single year of the 90s, there was an album that she released. And she was on tour for, I think from 93 onwards, you know?
Mm.
And these tours were like, she'd maybe only have 2 days rest in between each gig. And she's singing songs that most of us can't even sing one of, you know? Like, there's very few singers I even know personally who can sing more than 3 Mariah Carey songs in a row. And Mariah Carey has to do Mariah Carey for an hour or 2 hours, you know. That kind of thing. Like, of course, her voice is going to get tired. Of course, she's going to experience changes in her voice because you just can't maintain that. And then, again, that's one hat she has. Like, that's, if she was somebody that was like in a glass coffin and you just sort of wheeled her out and plugged her in when you needed her to perform, that would be like, okay, yeah, sweet. But she's not, you know. After that gig, what was she doing? You don't know. She might have had to go to an interview, had to do studio. What time was she getting up in the morning? You don't know that either. But what we do know from biographies and from people now talking more openly in interviews, especially from that time, their schedules were ridiculous. The only person that seemed to escape that really well was Celine Dion, and that's because her husband was looking out for his wife and not for his money, you know, money-making entity. Whereas Mariah Carey's husband was, at the time, the head of Sony, and they had to compete with Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
And
Michael Jackson at that stage and all those.
One thing to do is like listen to each of Whitney Houston's albums, like start to finish, from each different year. You hear her voice change dramatically from the 80s to the 90s. By the time she gets to The Bodyguard, you're like, man, she's singing so much lower. If you Beyonce is another prime example of that. In her first album, like Destiny's Child and all of that, man, her vocal runs are all over the place. Her voice is so light and, you know, childlike. Then you get to Dangerously in Love. She's still doing that, but she's got a lot more weight. B-Day was where she was singing super, super high and belting. And then suddenly you get to I Am Sasha Fierce, and she's doing like If I Were a Boy and all of that, where she's using more of her lower range. Every album after that, you'll notice gets lower and lower and lower. And part of that is she's got so many hits that require her to sing up here that she needed to create some hits that gave her a rest on a live show. Otherwise, she's going to have going to have to try and sing that.
So your revs are like, you're going to blow the motor at some stage. You got to change the gear down.
And then you notice that she's pulled back off of doing albums so frequently because she just doesn't need to anymore. And she is somebody who takes keys down all the time. But you don't feel like you lose anything from that for live because she thinks about her show. That's the same as Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson always thought about the show. What would the show entail? Dancing, like the choreography, what does the set look like? Who's going to fill in this time here where I go and get changed or whatever. Like he really thought about all of those aspects, and they did that so that they'd have time to recover in order to be able to sing live again. Whereas now you don't have that as often. I'm still hard pressed to find, and I could be completely wrong on this, but I'm still hard pressed to find somebody who is pegged as one of the legends of today. Like, who are they?
Yeah.
Do you know? Because I can't really think of one yet. Bruno Mars is probably the closest. And yet I still don't hear his name being used in that status, whereas by the time he's been around for 10
longer than that. By
the time Whitney Houston 10 years had passed, like her first album was 1985, and then you got 92, which was The Bodyguard, and then she did Cinderella. By the time she got to Cinderella and Waiting to Exhale, Everybody was saying, you know, like, she's the legendary voice. By the time Mariah Carey sort of filled out the 90s, that 10 years, they were like, she's legendary. And yet I can't think of anybody in the past 10 years who's been given that title.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. There's people who deserve it. Like Lady Gaga probably deserves it.
I think she might have been the closest when it came to like popularity wise, because if you watch all those old Michael Jackson concerts, you know, the bad concerts, or Whitney Houston or Mariah Carey, like you look at the crowds and the way that they used to just wait at the hotels and follow them around, and you had fan clubs and all that. Honestly, you're absolutely right, because there isn't an artist where you go, you know, because Michael Jackson's the king of pop. You know, like Elvis is the king of, you know, they haven't reached the iconic status yet. Yeah. You know, and I thought there was a time where Lady Gaga, when she had she came out with after Poker Face and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But she would kind of set a trend. Yeah. Where she would be at the Oscars, she was wearing the meat suit, and so she was all over the news. Yeah. And I didn't, like you said, I didn't think there's anyone in the last 10 years that really has really put a stamp on.
I speculate that it's because certain things have been done before, like Bruno Mars, and again, like, I think he's amazing, but every single album he's done has been almost in complete tribute to a certain sound.
That's right.
So when he did that whole like run, 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 run away, but it was all the rock and roll stuff, and then when he got to Treasure, it was Michael Jackson. That's like right. That, all the collection of Michael Jackson, and then you get to like Finesse and all of that. I mean, that's the sound that a lot of us would have grown up with. That
the R&B,
early 90s R&B. I mean, like Finesse even starts with the something similar to Belle Biv's Poison. The you know, even the rap is kind of like Bobby Brown's rap in every little step. Like it's that kind of same flow of how would you like a piece of this pie? You know, like it's that kind of, it's got that feel to it. Yeah. And so you're like, oh, I know this sound already.
Yeah.
And so then, and then now he's doing
New Jack
Swing.
Sound,
and Quiet Storm stuff, like that's right. Versace on the Floor's Quiet Storm. It's old Babyface.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you get his new album, or I don't know what it is, but like with Anderson .Paak, like the Leave the Door Open. Yeah. It's Marvin Gaye. That's right. Stevie Wonder. It's that mid-70s, early 70s soul sound where everything kind of just went real chill. And I think I consider him like legendary. Yeah. But I think part of the reason why he's not is because of that. Because people can always like throw back to where it came from. And is he doing it better than them? Is he doing it on the same level as them? And that is now in the court of public opinion. And before that, with Michael Jackson and that, you didn't have a court of a public opinion, you know? Like, you had whatever the media gave you. Yeah. And if they said this was a legendary performance, you just believed it. You were like, yeah. Now you go, oh, hang on. Yeah. Is it? And it's the same with Lady Gaga. There's a lot of Madonna-like qualities of her early stuff. But I think Lady Gaga's issue is that people didn't realize she could sing really well live until she started being given random things to do. Like she did the Sound of Music tribute for Julie Andrews, and she sang in that style, and then people were like, whoa, she can actually sing, and she doesn't need all this sort of auto-tune stuff that her early stuff, like Poker Face and all of that, utilised as a tool, not because she couldn't sing. And then you have things like she did the whole album with Tony Bennett, which was a jazz album, and then people were like, whoa, she can actually like sing and not look really out of it, you know, over the top. And that sort of thing happened much later in her career, like almost 10 years after she'd done Poker Face and Just Dance and all of those hits. But yeah, she's like live. I remember the hype that used to come around. I loved seeing it because I was like living in town, and you'd have like people going to the Vector Arena at the time. And when Lady Gaga was on, you'd have all of these like kids, well, I assume they were like quite young, and she would tell them to dress up like monsters, so they'd all be dressed just over the top, and they'd be going to this concert. You know, they all look like they were going to a massive Thriller reenactment, but she had that draw card, but as she's aged, so has her audience, and I don't know if they would still do that. You know, if she had a monster reunion, are they going to go dress up like monsters? I would love to, you know, now. You know, but in retrospect, you're kind of like, oh man, that would have been a cool thing to be a part of, and probably me back then was like, oh, over the top, like too much. You know? You know, that was just my own bias towards it. Excuse. Oh, yep, get that on camera. Cool, sorry.
I'll cut it out.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot of it, eh? Yeah, so, I don't know, eh? I just think it's hard pressed to find a legend, and I don't necessarily know whether people care anymore about singing. You get older people, and when I say older, I mean like 25 and over, who do care about that. And New Zealand's going through a really cool process of big live bands have come back. We've got LAB, we've got Troy Kingi, we've got 660, we've got people like Mara TK and Teeks, and they, you know, using these huge orchestras, and like people are becoming more interested in actually attending those.
Yeah, 660 has been a phenomenon, man, lately,
You know,
especially in New Zealand.
It's saying that if you're on Twitter, there's a bit of a campaign hashtag. You know, there's 660 is getting a lot of backlash at the moment. Yeah, man.
Are they? How
A
come?
lot of there's you know, we were talking about ear fatigue. I think the people that are airing it on Twitter, I think there's a bit of 660 fatigue.
Yeah.
You know, and I couldn't understand that because but then I'm thinking, like, typical New Zealand, you know, when we talk about the tall poppy syndrome, it kind of feels that way. It's like everyone's like, man, I don't know why everyone's going to 660. They do the same thing every year. They do the same dance in there, you know, same kind of thing. And I couldn't understand. Well, I can understand it because Kiwis are a bit like that. But if you're on Twitter, it's quite a big. It's a bit of a movement.
Yeah, there's a.
Oh, you've seen it too on Twitter?
Oh, I know about it. Like musicians, there's a lot of musicians who bag on them because they use a pop format that is just repetitive and the same. Like, I've heard all the excuses. I don't care. I like 660. I like their songs. I don't feel like they offend my ears in any type of way. There are songs that I would rather not hear, but that's just for different reasons. Like, Don't Forget Your Roots, for example. I don't mind singing it. I have no issue with the song in itself. But when you teach at a high school, that is the go-to song for students. So you might be hearing that, say, 20, 30 times a year, and not played particularly well in the beginning, you know, and you have to go through that process again and again of teaching them how to play this. You're going to get sick of that. Like, it starts to become like doing the dishes, you know. You get sick of washing dishes and drying dishes and putting them away, but you still do it, you know. The reality with 660 and a lot of the Twitter people is you don't have to listen.
Yeah, that's right.
That's my mentality. You know, and I'm thinking maybe it's just the people that live around Eden Park that are starting this Twitter, I think, because they don't want any more big bands performing at yeah.
The distance with the mic.
Yeah.
You want me to go closer?
Oh, you can pull it up too.
Yeah.
Technology. Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But I just couldn't understand how people get into these kind of hashtag and kind of negative stuff, you know. Because we're still a small country.
I think there's a phenomenon of feeding things. It's like one of the coolest things that I saw a few years back was somebody explaining like facts, and they're like, so for example, you know that cigarettes kill more people than cancer, right? And you know that a lot of people don't like green vegetables, okay? And it's like we nod and we go, yeah, that's true. But I just made that up. I don't know if that's a fact. I can't actually prove that. personally, I just said it right now, and all I had to say was like, oh, I heard this thing that was like, and it was this. And then people go, oh, okay. Now, the only difference is I've just said I made that up. I don't know if it's true. But you could walk away today, and had I said nothing, you would carry that, and you might pass it on to somebody else. And you go, cigarettes.
Yeah.
And maybe it does, I don't know. But you've said that. And then that sticks with that person, and then they pass it on. And I kind of think it's like somebody has gone, oh, I used to like 660, but then I realized blah, blah, blah. Have you ever noticed that? And they've said something,
right.
and then somebody's gone,
Absolutely.
yeah. And rather than be like abrasive and be like, no, I don't think that, which a lot of us are not well equipped to do. We just go, no.
Yeah.
It's the following mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not even it's just planting a seed. Like you find some people go, no, I don't accept that at all, and then you have this process of back and forth where somebody's trying to talk you around. And I think that 660 and a lot of other artists have fallen victim to that. And 660 is one of those things where, to be honest, I will be at a party or a barbecue or a family gathering and a song comes on and I didn't even notice the song was on there, But somewhere in the back of my mind, I've acknowledged that 660 is playing. And I can either let that irritate me or I can just be like, and switch it off, In my head, we do that with people. They talk to us, and then it gets to a certain point, and we just start going, okay, and we're not actually listening. We can hear what they're saying, but it's not fully going in. You can do that with music. We do it all the time with barbecues. Like if I was asking you at the last family gathering, what was the song that played an hour into your family gathering? You wouldn't be able to tell me, unless you were the person curating the playlist. Then you can go back into Spotify if you still have it, but you don't know. Know what I mean? And like, that's the thing. That's your ability to just not listen and just to shut it out. But people who actively have to go online and go, I hate 660. It's this thing of like, you've put so much effort into this, and you're going to go, no, it doesn't take anything. Like I just write this and then I press send. But you've actually put that effort into it. You've made it a part of your day.
Yeah.
Like what are the things that don't make a part of your day? You say you're going to catch up with this mate, and then you don't catch up with that mate. That mate, who's more important, didn't get a 660 post. You gave Twitter 660, but you didn't give that mate time. Where are you investing your time? To hate on somebody. When reality is, if you hate them and you don't care, then they don't factor into your life. It doesn't matter. But that's that. You see all those special quotes that come up on social media all the time about like, if you see your enemy laughing across the street and you get, offended, then they have power over you or they have control over you. It's to an effect, it's true. Nobody wants to see somebody they think doesn't deserve it succeed. But at the same time, if your focus is on their success, how are you doing? Like you're not checking in on yourself. You're not investing into the people that actually want to invest in you. You're not even giving time to yourself to love that positive aspect of your life. You're just looking at somebody and going, you don't deserve this. And that's what people do with musicians like 660. The other thing is that they think they're just not that great as musicians.
I'm thinking like those type of like subjective conversations. Like I because I'm a big sports fan, right?
Yeah.
So I love American sports, especially only because of the way the fans over there and the media over there talks to the players, the professional players, and it's done in a way where it's sort of, if New Zealand media do the same things America does, it's like no, it's extreme in the way where they put down their players if they do something bad in the game, and they did, even the fans, they go all out on that player if he had a shit game and their team loses. But the next week, when he has a mean game and the team wins, then they praise him.
Or there's people like John McEnroe where they just love to hate him, you know, like it's become part of his brand.
Yeah,
you know. But
exactly.
It's a thing, right?
So I try to think about New Zealand, how we're not on the same level as them, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's like when, I don't know how to say it. It's like,
I think people get pretty hype over the whole lot. Like,
I get it. It's sports.
I know nothing
It's
about
sports.
sports. Eh?
yeah,
So,
but it's the same. It's the same interaction between the fans and the sports person. Like,
yeah,
it's hostile,
yeah,
right? But it's subjective, and it has to be.
because you can apparently just wheel them out again and plug them in, and then they play a good game. But it's the hat that they wear when they're on the field doesn't necessarily align with who they are. I mean, like, this is the thing again, the whole Twitter hate and all of that, and the keyboard warrior stuff is something that even personally I have to keep myself in check. Do I need to say it or do I not? And quite often I go through, I don't know if you've ever seen posts that I've written, they're super long, like speculatory things where I try and hit every angle as opposed to having an opinion. And I will ask a question to garner opinions, but I do understand that, like, I'm guilty of it sometimes myself, and I appreciate when I get checked these days. I don't know if I would have been back in the day, you know, but I do like to have a platform for discussion where we can actually discuss these things with American sports.
I mean, I'll just use that as an example.
Yeah, but it's such a strange thing, like, because it's something, again, I don't really know anything about sports, but the level, you know, my friends in America, even some of my friends here, the level of dedication that they have to that sport and to certain players, it baffles me.
Yeah.
Because I can't relate on that level. But then I suppose in music, I do have that bias where I'm like, somebody goes, oh yeah, such and such is the next Mariah Carey, and I'm like, really?
Hey.
Like, and I get real, like,
Hold my beer.
and I do. I know I do. Like, I'm not somebody who's gonna say that I don't do that, because I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing with it's people are subjective to music. They either like you or hate you.
Yeah.
But they also can listen to you or they don't listen to you.
Yeah.
I mean, and if a stranger is doing that to someone, they're just a stranger, and you just took 5 minutes out of your day
Yeah.
to do that shit.
Yeah.
And who are you? I don't even know you.
Well,
Who are you?
it's like, I think that the closest we have to that in, again, this is an uneducated stab in the dark, but it's the whole Queensland versus...
Oh, New South
South
Wales.
Wales,
Like,
yeah.
State of Origin.
people act
Okay.
like they played the game.
You know what?
Like,
We're
and I-
guilty
No,
of that.
but
'Cause
that's what I'm saying. Like, sports, it's tribal.
Yeah.
It's not personal. It's an identity of a team that you relate to. That
Yeah.
you're part of this team.
Yeah.
You're part of this culture. This is yours. This is your tribe.
Yeah.
And you go to war. I mean, sports is competitive. Like, you go to war. These
Yeah.
two teams go to war. You're on one side or the other side. You support that side. You want to win.
Yeah,
And
it's-
if you don't
it's
win,
interesting,
you're gonna
yeah.
be pissed off. But
Yeah.
if you win, you're gonna be you're gonna celebrate it because your mates that are on the other side of the team, they lost. You're gonna rub it in their face. I mean, it's part of the whole. I think it's part of the whole. It's part of the whole thing with. You know what I mean? It's part of it.
I think what people find hard to believe is that it's two teams in Australia. You know, we have no affiliation with them. Us guys staying over there. I never stayed in Sydney, or I never stayed in Queensland and that. But it's funny because it just really once you, it feels like when you pick a side, you stay on that side. You know, and so it's kind of like, you know, like he was trying to, like he was saying, like we just really, when you see us on those games, you want to like we say the most vile thing, or not the most vile things towards each other, but he just in that moment, you know, for 80 minutes. Because we support opposite teams. I'm not Cameron's friend. There's going to be banter.
Oh,
you know, yeah. And he's not my friend during that game. I'm going to say the worst. I'm going to say some really bad stuff about his team, certain players, and that. And then afterwards, you know, whoever wins, there's that euphoria of winning, and after that we just have a laugh and
Yeah.
finish the rest of the beers. Kind of thing.
I think that's the closest I've ever seen to the American thing, though, is that
It does get like that.
I've seen people fight over it,
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
like, you didn't
Yeah.
play, you didn't
Yeah,
actually
and
play,
you're absolutely right. You're
like
absolutely right.
you don't have to be that hurt about
That's-
this. But yeah, I understand there was a period where, is it Sydney?
Yeah.
Did it win for years?
Oh,
Is
New
that
South
right?
Wales.
New South Wales did it
That's
win
right.
for years,
For nine
and then they
years.
won
Yeah.
once, and just it was like,
Yeah, don't have to remind me. Don't have to remind me.
and
Absolutely right,
the Queensland fans were like, I'm like ready to fight you.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, wouldn't you just be happy? Like, congratulations, like, finally.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I don't get that. But then also, you get music. There's like actual syndicates. This is crazy. Like, in America, there are syndicated like TV stations that are not allowed to talk about Beyonce.
Damn.
Because the fear of her fans is more damaging to their TV network than actually having a discussion that's two-sided or multiple layers to. And there are people who now outright refuse, like as soon as the Beyonce, I'm not doing this, I'm not losing my job. And it's like there is that element there that happens now that social media is a thing for music. Mariah Carey was one of those people as well that actually spoke out about how when people thought she was going crazy and when this was happening, like, and when certain things went, and they go, why is she like that? What is she doing that for? And she couldn't speak for herself. The tabloids did. And now fans will come out to her defense. She doesn't have to do anything. They just speak for her. And that's the power of social media, is that you can actually have a following who speak for you, or who'll come out and be just like, nah, piss off.
Well,
But that never used to happen. At least with sports, there's a developed camaraderie that comes from watching the same sport.
Yeah.
So when a rival team loses, when a rival team wins, you can feel like a bit gutted about it, but your mate on the other side of the table is not going to, throw their fists up just because of that. I don't think music is in that same position where that happens. The whole 660 thing, I don't know whether their fans think it's worth fighting about, or whether they're even aware. There are some people who come out and be like, don't talk about them, they're the greatest band ever. And it's like, yeah, they might be. But to somebody else, they ain't anything, It's just because they're not on that team. But it's just that phenomenon it baffles me, like, all the time. And mainly because I have no idea what they're talking about. So it's like you're speaking another language, and I'm just sort of like waiting for the conversation to take a turn so that I can integrate, and become part of the conversation. But generally, if you said sports to me, I'm going to be one of those people that sort of glass-eyed goes, yeah, oh yeah.
I remember the first, the 660 for me, first, when I first took notice of it was when they had that Western Springs concert a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it was like
Huge.
the most people.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, true. I didn't know that.
And there was a lot of work. There was a lot of work from that point, from where they started to getting there. People forget they have probably been around since I remember them. Maybe pre-2010. My sister had gone to Dunedin or whatever and picked up like one of their EPs. It was terribly recorded, but that EP had maybe 4 songs on their first album, including Don't Forget Your Roots. And at that time, nobody had predicted that this band, at that time, they definitely sounded like a high school band. And I think they were really young when they recorded that. So nobody had thought that they would do that. In the same way, Troy Kingi doesn't get his flowers a lot, but The dude committed to 10 albums in 10 different genres in 10 years, and he's halfway through that. He's gone and he's done it, you know? And I think, like, the thing is that experiencing him via albums is one thing. Experiencing him live is a completely different entity, and that's what 660 holds, is that their live shows have become something that people want to see, and they feel good when they go there, and they remember it being something that they felt good about. And now 660 is using their platform to have people like Troy Kingi and Drax Project and all the LAB, all these other bands come in and play under them, you know? And so, like, bands that people normally wouldn't have
exposed to,
engaged with, they're like, oh, and they go away thinking, maybe I want to listen to them a little more. You know, I think that's a positive that people don't see, because they focus so much towards wanting to have an opinion about a band that is doing good.
Yeah, I thought about those kind of things when we started this podcast, because you know, you are creating something and putting it out there for the public to hopefully enjoy.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that you made out of nothing, and if someone out there, maybe one person listens to it, they actually took time out of their day to listen and had thoughts about what they're hearing and going about their day and thinking about it, hopefully, you know. And that's and if you think about, if you didn't do it, that wouldn't have happened.
That was exactly my goal with my album, was if one person, that's why I never really wanted to release it, or have everybody know I released it, was that if I just put it out there and then somebody discovered it by chance because they were looking for somebody else whose name was Hawkins, and they came across a song and they were like, oh, I like the song. And then they listened to whatever I'd released and they enjoyed it. Like, I'd achieved what I'd always wanted to achieve in music, which was that same thing that a lot of artists did for me, which was like make me feel like I've discovered a secret, and a really good secret that nobody else knows. I know lots of people know Mariah Carey, and I know lots of people know Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson, but when I listen to those albums, it's just for myself, you know? Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye. Then there's the artists that a lot of people don't know, like Glenn Jones and Billy Ocean, who I grew up, like, as a kid, loving those artists, Melissa Morgan, Shaka Khan with Rufus, you know, like those sort of things. But it's fun for me when I play a song or somebody talks about they've just discovered Faith Evans, you know, and I'm like, oh yeah, I love Faith Evans. Like, I had this album when I was a kid, and I get really excited about it because I suddenly have this treasure, you know, like a tonga of like this information that I can now share with you. Like, if you're going to go down that rabbit hole, let me push you. Like, I want you to go down there, and I want you to experience this. I've sat with this for years and had nobody to talk to about it, and now I have somebody to talk to about it. That's really exciting, you know. And you find, I think almost everyone I know has that experience with an artist, even if it's a single song, like where they can just get really deep on that one song and they can just go. Yeah.
Continue.
Oh no, yeah, that's it. Like, they just being able to go full well into it and actually share and exchange. Again, I said, like, right at the start, that I think one of the things that people want to do is connect. And when you have that experience, especially as you get older, it becomes more sentimental. Like, we'll probably all know songs that our grandparents, like, we hear it and we go, oh, this song.
That's right.
You know, like, there's a song that my mum used to play when we had to clean the house, and it was like the alarm for like cleaning time.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that when I hear that song, I'm like, oh yeah. And it's actually joyous now. It doesn't have maybe the same attachment that it might have had once upon a time, but being able to then share that extension of yourself where you go, you know, my mum used to play this song, or this is when my uncle, when it got to a certain part of the night and they were all sort of drunk, and then or whatever, and they got the guitar out, this was like one of the songs that I would hear. And it's funny because sometimes you don't even know the original, you've just heard the guitar version in the garage, and you're like, oh, is this where this came from? But it forever becomes associated with that. And then sometimes it's way deeper than that. You're just like, man, I saw Michael Jackson when I was this age, and he did this song and he did this thing, and you like start to share about why you love that artist, you know. And on that, like, I was more of a Janet Jackson fan than a Michael Jackson fan, but that's only because, you know, I'm 1987, and by that time, it was sort of Janet era, you know.
The Rhythm Nation kind of came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Control,
Control, yeah.
and the Janet Period album with That's the Way Love Goes, and Poetic Justice came out, like she'd started acting. Yeah, so I remember that really fondly, and I think the album that I know at Michael Jackson's collection now, and I am a fan, but for me, it was the Bad album, you know, with Michael Jackson, where a lot of people before me, it was Thriller or Off the Wall, you know, that's the one they go, yeah, man. And then even people my age are like, nah, it was the Dangerous album. But I remember the Dangerous tour, but I know I liked the Bad album, more than any other albums. And that's that thing, like, I know all of that now, and I like to talk about it as much as possible. You know, anytime I get to bring up music, it goes into this thing of, like, once somebody brings up an artist, I'm all of a sudden, like, right on it, talking about, like, where things came from, or what I was doing when I first heard this album, how old I was. Yeah, it becomes all about yourself, but then at the same time, you're also sharing about that.
You know, it's awesome that you talked about all these, you know, all us in it. Can we go back to, like, who were your influences? Did you have siblings or cousins that? Because, you know, I speaking for myself, I had an older brother, so he was 5 years older than me. Yeah. So he was always like, I was a bit, you know, he would always come home with a cassette. And I remember listening, and he had, man, I got the Bad album. I'm like, oh, Michael Jackson's, LL Cool J's Bad album. I'm like, what? Who the heck's that? You know, and so he turned that on, and I went, oh, you know, it was my first kind of exposure to rap. And then I remember we had the New Edition. You know, I'm like you as well. Yeah. When I hear music, I get real sentimental as well. You know, I think of when you talked about Bad. I remember opening up the album, and it had the sleeve with his photos, and it's got the words, and I'd sit and write down the words. Yeah. You know, who were your influences? Like, did you have siblings? Was your mom?
Yeah. Oh gosh. So my dad is 12th in his family, and there's technically 15, but there's 17 kids, because there's the whāngai as well, and so the difference between my father and his oldest brothers is like 20-something years.
Wow.
Difference. They grew up with country music and rock and roll, because the music of their time was like 1950s. And then you got his sisters down from there in 1960s, so on and so forth. Dad was very much into Luther Vandross, like he loved the Quiet Storm era, so that's the early 80s to mid 80s R&B, and a lot of those artists are somewhat forgotten about, in the sense of, like, if I was to say a name, quite often people go, oh nah, but you'll know the song, which is really weird. Like, you'll go, oh yeah, I know that song because of a sample. It's like Notorious B.I.G., the Juicy, and the dad liked M2May, who the lead singer is Tuatha A.G. So the chorus and the sample from Juicy for Notorious B.I.G., dad liked the original. Yeah. You know, so I know the original because the record was in the house. Their mum was like Stevie Wonder and George Benson, but she also liked a lot of, like, I don't even know what you call it, dream pop. Kate Bush. I don't know if you know who Kate Bush is, but she loved Kate Bush. She loved Whitney, because Whitney was sort of from her era and nobody sung like her. They both loved Shaka Khan. They loved Etta James, because in the 80s, BB King used to do these like BB King and Friends things where he'd just get all of them to
There's
jam.
variety show kind
Yeah,
of things.
yeah. And then there's Billy Ocean. Like, I remember, this is going way back, but they used to play late at night. They used to play like entire video, like histories of artists. So like we had, for whatever reason, Dad had taped the whole of Billy Ocean's like videos.
Oh yeah, no, they used to do that at Aotea, like, but they used to. I remember because we had the Bros one.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they had the
Bros,
five. They had 5 songs. And I remember the orders like Drop the Boy.
Yeah.
When Will I Be Famous?
Yeah.
You know. So I remember those.
Yeah.
And we used to record them because you'd look it up in the newspaper saying, today, it usually used to come like 5 or 6 o'clock. And if it was your favorite artist, you know you were going to get 6 of their
So there was that was with Dad, like it was the Billy Ocean one, and I knew every song, knew every video clip, and I think when we were little we thought that our dad was related to Billy Ocean because we thought they looked similar and they wore similar clothes, So I was like that. Oh yeah, that's Dad's cousin, and like because he's from such a massive family, you just used to believe it.
The movie Jewel of the Nile was that Billy Ocean song.
When
Was
they go
that
and get
one?
stuff,
Doing his stuff,
yeah,
that's cool.
And he had,
even the video, cause
they had them singing.
Danny DeVito and Michael.
Yeah. Like I know that right the way through. But then, there's a lot of things that I got wrong that I used to think were right. Like, I thought Mum liked Peter Gabriel, and that's how I knew the So album, which was a huge influence. And it turned out that was her brother, and he just left his records at our house because he lived with them at one point, and then when he moved on to another house, he left the records, and so I just would listen to them. But yeah, Billy Joel was massive. And he's like, Billy Joel's that weird one that kind of lots of people say they don't know much about. There's not many of his songs, and then you sort of sing them and they go, oh, does he sing that? Because he didn't really have a style. He just kind of, Billy Joel sang Billy Joel. And then there was just random things like Dusty Springfield, who's a 60s artist. Yeah, like I love Dusty Springfield. Edith Piaf. My grandmother was really into jazz, so I got raised with a lot of Ella Fitzgerald and Dinah Washington, which again, names that are kind of lost in history. They're huge, like everybody knows them. There's going to be somebody out there that's going to be like, oh, that's ridiculous, everybody knows Dinah Washington. But if you bring it up to people, they're like, oh, I don't know. And the reality is Dinah Washington was one of the greatest influences of Amy Winehouse. That was like her big influence when she was a kid. So it's like, even though you don't know who Dinah Washington is, you can hear her influence in Amy Winehouse. If you just listen to them side by side, you're like, oh yeah, I see where that's coming from. So those were all my influences. And then obviously I had my own generation, which was, like Mariah Carey, obviously. I loved Boyz II Men, but not as much as I think other people loved Boyz II Men, because my cousins, we were Taumaranui, and you kind of just took what you could get. And I think what happened at the record stores in Taumaranui was anything that wasn't popular in Auckland or wherever got sent down there, made its way down there. So it was actually like a real huge... my favourite... bands were like Drew Hill. Boy bands R&B was Drew Hill, Silk, and Mint Condition.
That's a pretty good.
But a lot of people don't know many songs of Mint Condition or Silk. Like they don't know a whole lot. They'll know like maybe one or two, or even Drew Hill. And then it's crazy to think that, like Boyz II Men is still generation to generation. My students, I've caught them like listening to End of the Road and then like trying to tap out of it when we come in, and they're like, why aren't you practicing your song? And it's like they know who Boyz II Men is, so obviously somebody in their family has passed it on. And that's that thing, like I loved Boyz II Men, but I never owned a Boyz II Men album until I was maybe 12. And then the album that the two albums that I had were Two in Motown Philly.
Yeah.
But I had Silk and Mint Condition when they came out, like
Yeah.
Definition of a Band when that album came out. I had that album in its time, you know. So I loved that. I loved because there was real singers around there, like as well. You know,
That's
you had
right.
Deborah Cox, you had Brandy and Monica. You know, like it's crazy. I was listening to Brandy's first album, and I was like, she was 14.
Yeah.
It's crazy when you think like I Want to Be Down and all of that was when she was.
Man, that song. When I hear that song, it takes me back too.
Yeah.
And I remember because it's around 95, 90. You know, and I remember was it 96? I just remember where I was. You know, where I was in life, and I was still at college. You know, trying to go to the movies with $12 and still try and get some Georgia pie as well on the side there. You know,
Go to Time Zone.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the one. It feels like that era, and we always talk about it because you know me and the boys that work, we're all the same age in that, but we always go that era's gold. Like if it comes to R&B and it's real songs, because that's why I think why people are resonating with Bruno Mars in it, because they're going most of the stuff that they're taking, it's from that era.
So my own album was about nostalgia. Was that thing I wanted it to throw back people hear it and go, oh yeah. And the one that's dedicated to that specific era is a song called All This Time. And I specifically wanted to try and get it to sound like how Definition of a Band by Mint Condition was recorded. So there's like, what kind of man would I be is on that album. It just feels hugely live.
Is that song before Fireflies? Oh, what's the playlist?
Yeah, it's the one just before.
Oh, because I had a different thinking of that. Because that was another one of my favorite songs, that one.
Yeah.
I was thinking of Brad McKnight.
That's
what I was thinking about.
It's still a compliment. I mean, like, I guess in the context of things, though, like it's still like Brian McKnight favoured.
Like to me, that song was more R&B than all the other songs.
Yeah, it was intentionally meant to sound like 90s R&B.
Cool.
Yeah, so if you got 90s R&B from it,
it
borrowed a bit. Like the backing vocals are kind of stenciled around Drew Hill's backing vocals, like the way they shaped or made their sound. But the live sound of it was meant to be more Mint Condition, because Mint Condition was like one of my favourite singers was Stokely.
Yeah,
and he's a drummer as well. Like, but just that his sound was real interesting to me. And then like the kind of backbeat style was meant to be H-Town. It's that kind of like it just sort of always feels like it's just behind the beat, you know. That was the whole point of it. Rumors was straight 70s soul, so it's like I wanted that to try and sound like Marvin Gaye without getting a lawsuit from Marvin Gaye, you know what I mean? So
Robin Thicke can talk about
that. But that was the thing, like if you hear Robin Thicke in it as well, like that's like Robin Thicke was heavily influenced by Marvin Gaye, but it's that layering. Even though the music is kind of just like in the background and you don't it's moving a lot, but you don't necessarily feel like it's moving.
You know, thinking about it, like you told us about all the influences you had in your parents' music, and you grew up in the 90s R&B. Yeah. You can hear all of that in your album.
I tried to. I did try to. Because
the other thing I thought about was there's one song, I think it was the second song. Sorry, I forgot the name of the song, but I know. But some of the songs too remind me of movie soundtracks. It would be good on a movie.
Thank you. Another goal. Yeah. Really? The other goal was to make each piece cinematic, so it felt like it.
I got that. I got that feeling. I think the second song and maybe the last song.
Well,
Halo.
You know, when you talk about the 90s, that was the era of like soundtracks.
Halo.
Because you know the Boomerang soundtrack, and they had like the Poetic Justice song. Like it was all different, like different songs, but it made that that was the era of every soundtrack made the movie above the rim kind of different kind of styles and that. Yeah, and that's I think a lot of us experienced it through movie soundtracks as well. Like the first time most people heard Tony Braxton was from Boomerang. That's right. Love Should Have Brought You Home. Even that like whole song was influenced by a line that Halle Berry says, where she like touches his forehead. It's like, love should have brought your ass home. That's right. And then that's what that song belongs to that scene. It's in the same way that like there was a lot of like adults that knew Maxwell.
but for a lot of us, the teenagers and the kids, remember Maxwell because of this woman's work coming from Love and Basketball, and it was the sex scene, you know. But that was that thing. Like I and a lot of my age group remember it from Love and Basketball. But that song, This Woman's Work, was a Kate Bush song.
Mm.
So it's it's completely distant from what it became in neo soul. But it's similar, and it's like he didn't change any of the arrangement. Even the pitch he's singing in is her pitch, you know. And then it's like when you look at Kate Bush. So Kate Bush was one of my influences. But then another one of my influences that didn't make the album because I wouldn't know how to do it, was heavily influenced by Kate Bush. Outkast. So Outkast, huge fans of Kate Bush. Completely different music. But it's because she was one of the first people to really overuse samples or to create samples in the way that hip-hop started to use them. Yeah, so that sort of thing, you just don't know what people are taking from where, and I think it's like really important to have listened to a lot of things, especially if you're going to record. Otherwise, you're going to make something that sounds exactly like the one thing that you're listening to. Yeah, and so the second song was I Couldn't Tell It All, which was about my great-grandmother's dementia.
Oh.
Yeah, and my experience with her dying, because she's the first death I'd seen. She's the first person I'd nursed through that, like to her death, and watching her memory just disappear. And then me as a 16-year-old just wishing that I'd actually taken the time to write everything down that she had said. Those are the sort of concepts that Kate Bush wrote about a lot. Was just really out of it. Things she based a lot of things on literature, and then it's the sounds. Like I wanted that to sound like a mid-80s track, so I went for that on that song. Yeah, and that's where that influence comes from, is Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel's So album. Yeah, but that's what it is. Yeah.
There's a Malcolm Gladwell podcast about country music.
Yeah.
And that one with the writing. And he talks about how the writing is different for country music to any other genre that's out there, because it's more deep. And it's about like...
Well, because he talks about how pop songs, popular pop songs, they're real broad. Yeah. But when it comes to country songs, they talk about, like you're talking about, how you said you're talking about your mother's or your grandmother's dementia.
Great.
There, but you're great. Yeah, and they talk about stuff like drinking too much. I mean, like real life, like getting a divorce and stuff like that. And, and that's how why their songs are so, they resonate with people, because they're real specific in their topics. But when you come to pop songs, they talk about, like, they're real broad. They don't really touch on certain things.
So there's a song again on my album, like What's Wrong with the World, and it's, I think, the fourth track, and that's based on country. So country music is interpersonal relationships, so it's all about like between you and I.
That's right.
And then you get folk music. And this was a country folk song, but folk music is like about the greater world, you know, but us. And then pop music is more heavily reliant on an emotional value. So if you're talking about like R&B, especially as emotional value, it's all about like, I'll get down on bended knee and I'll just beg you to stay with me. Whereas, you know, you get Tammy Wynette, another of my favorite singers from when I was a kid, who talks about, in 2 minutes, she talks about a divorce.
That's right.
And the whole thing is about how she spells out all the hurting words so that her young son can't understand that she's talking about a divorce. So she spells the word out. And it's just saying, you know, our DIVORCE became final today. There's another song called I Don't Want to Play House. And again, it's about 2 minutes, 2 minutes 30 long. And she's just talking about how she's sitting at the window and she sees her little girl and she sees the boy next door and they're playing, and she suddenly she hears what he's saying, and he's like, "Do you want to play house?" And she goes, "No, I don't want to play house." And then she's sitting at the window and she starts bawling her eyes out because she realizes how her father leaving her mother has impacted on her daughter. And she's like, when mummy played house, daddy said goodbye.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole song is. I don't want to play house. It can't be fun. I've watched mum and dad, and if that's the way it's done, I don't want to play house. And she's telling this boy, but she's just telling it in a very innocent way. And then there's one of the creepiest songs in the country thing is a song by a lady called Bobby Gentry, and it's called Ode to Billy Joe. If you ever get a chance to listen to it, it says absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. So it's all conversational. It's just talking about them like sitting at the table, and they're just talking about the rumors of the town, you know, like, and she's like, "Pass me the peas." That's like actually in the song lyrics. And all it's talking about is a boy who committed suicide, Billy Joe, after throwing something off of the cliff, off the Tallahatchie Bridge, and they don't know what it is. But the daughter sitting at the table has something to do with it, and the whole family doesn't realize she has something to do with it. And to this day, nobody knows what he threw off the bridge, what they threw off the bridge. But the thing that they think it was a child, a stillborn child.
Yeah, man. Some of these,
That's what I mean.
you know, country music it can be dark, eh?
Yeah,
Or some of these lyrics and some of these songs.
yeah,
Dolly Parton had one, the bridge.
yeah.
Have you read that one?
Nah.
When it's a story similar, where it's like a love story. You think it's a love story because it plays out like a love story until the very end.
Yeah,
Because it's like, you know, a couple meet on this bridge and they use this bridge as
the meeting.
the meeting place, and they have love and all that. Then he like sort of falls out of love with her and leaves. And then the end of the song, she's on the bridge.
Yeah.
And she's saying, "I'm on the bridge and I'm pregnant," and then she jumps off.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's
and
Dolly
it can
Parton
be
song.
really
Is like,
dark. Like there's one that's more recent. Martina McBride is one person to listen to if you want to hear dark country songs. Like Concrete Angel is about abuse. They sound happy as well.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Independence
That's the
Day.
thing. Yeah.
Independence Day sounds really happy, but it's actually about a girl who basically her father was beating her mother, and she decided to just run out of the house and go to the county fair. And while she was at the county fair, her mother decided she'd had enough, so she burnt the house down with her in it. You know, like she burnt, like he'd fallen asleep drunk, and she just... And Independence Day, it happened on Independence Day, so it happened on July 4th. But what it actually was her mother freeing herself from the situation and ending the abuse for her daughter, or as far as the song goes, you know. But that's, you know, like if you hear that song, it sounds happy, and you watch people sing along to it, and they're like, "Yeah, it's Independence Day." And it's like, no, it's about a woman like
Right. Freeing
basically,
herself.
yeah, by killing herself and her husband. Just be like, nah, we can't. Yeah. And but it's all said in an interpersonal way. You know, like Daddy'd been drinking again. You could smell it on his, you know. There's Harper Valley PTA.
Yeah, that's
another
favorite.
one, just about a mum going to a school and
That's
saying
right.
like, "Screw you guys," and
She
my
knew,
money's
she knew everyone. She knew the little secrets.
yeah,
and,
yeah, and that's what country music is, and yeah, it is written in a different way to a lot of pop. Tends to be a lot more mass generalized, you know, and at the moment it's very self-indulgent. Like, I'm so this and I'm all that, and look at my coat, you can't afford this, you know, like it's that whole thing now at the moment. But then on the other side of it, it's very much like like, we need to love each other, or we need to do, you know, it's all of these sort of big anthemic things. One that's come close, and she's an incredible singer, is Olivia Rodrigo, I think her name is. she wrote a song that's become like popular on TikTok called Driver's License, and it's shaped like a country song. Like it's the whole thing about they'd promised each other when she got a driver's license they'd go driving together, and you know, like that would be their thing that they do, and then they broke up and she's like, I've got my driver's license, you know, but now I drive alone past your street.
Oh,
Yeah, but it's pretty much shaped like a country song. Yeah, there's no other genre that you could get away with as well, jumping into like that would cross over into pop, where you could talk about like get yourself ready because I'm your man, like lock the doors and turn the lights down low, and everybody's like, yeah, it's nice, and it's like, it's about sex. Like he's telling her, get ready because daddy's coming home or whatever, you know. But he's saying that like quite nonchalant, and people are like, oh, I love that song. You kids sing it and they go, oh, cute, that kid's singing it. It's like, no, it's not. It's not a song that you want like a 5-year-old kid to be trying to sing. But okay, that's your prerogative. Yeah, I love country music.
yeah. No.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is ingrained in us, for some reason
Well,
or another, you know.
I think like if you listen to Samoan songs are a lot like country,
Yeah.
you know, and because they're real personal as well, you know,
Yeah.
they don't just not generalized. Like there's a song, My Dear, it's talking about a partner that's gone away, and he's working hard while the wife's staying at home, and then you know they're interacting, writing back and forth, and then he's gone so long that he goes back and she's gone with someone else or something like that. You know, that's the.
And there's a country song called Dear John, which is basically about somebody going to war and then getting a letter from his lover who's waiting at home saying, sorry, I met somebody else. You know, somebody comes.
So I'm pretty sure that's what it was based on.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and like, but then you also have your with Samoan songs, you have your folk influences as well. Like Le Tawalanga o Solomona is all about, like, it's the story of Solomon, but it's talking about we the people. So it's a very personal song to Samoa, but it's that whole thing of although we may appear poor or we may not have everything, we are like Solomon and our treasures are hidden deep in this cave. You know, like it's that sort of thing. I think a lot of those songs became what they were because country music was a stronghold at the time that they were written. It's even the same with Maori music, like, and you get like, although Prince Tuiteka was Maori, like he's everywhere in the Pacific Islands. You know, like people know Mum, that song, and they know E Po, but they are the same thing again, based heavily on country music, and it's what they had become accustomed to. The Samoan style of playing guitar,
That's right,
is like the finger picking that's popular in country music, as opposed to you know, what became popular in Western communities. Yeah, so it's a thing that's now become accustomed or associated as much with country music as it was with Samoan music. You know, there's we all know when we hear we know exactly what's about to happen.
Yeah.
We know the whole context. We even know what our roles are in that. Like, you know, I will stand on the outside and I'll just start rolling my hands. You know, like I know that that's about to come.
Yeah.
I'm not about to get in the middle because this introvert wants to stay as far away as possible, but also wants to participate. So that happens, you know.
Yeah.
And we all sing along. Even if we only know bits and pieces of the words, for some reason, once everybody starts singing along, I seem to know the entire 5 million verses to Ia Lava Lava, even though I've never chosen to listen to it on my own. Like I think I'm going to put this in my playlist today. I've never chosen to do that, but I know it well enough, verse by verse. How do I know that? Just continued experience and exposure to it. But the sound of that, again, Ia Lava Lava, Falia Lili, Minoi Minoi, they all sound like country, like when it comes down to it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like they all have that, like, you know, like it's straight away, you know that you're about to participate in something Samoan or really any Pacific culture. It's all slightly different, like variations, but you know it as soon as you hear it.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's country music was amazing. I also think it's because they didn't get music in the same way that the rest of New Zealand, like, you know, the bigger places did. Because, shucks, when was it? Like maybe 10 years ago, when I was in Samoa, the radio stations were playing music from the 80s and like the early 90s, and I was like, oh, it's just like they didn't have a modern radio station, not necessarily. I was like, this is the popular radio station around, you know, so people are still listening to that era of music. And they just kind of, I think it suits the setting of like a lot of it's, some Samoa always reminds me of an older time when there wasn't a lot of technology around. And you go there and it's kind of like stepping back in time in that way. You know, people are still sitting on the backs of pickup trucks.
Yeah.
No seatbelt. And like you do that here, you get a ticket, you know. So like that whole thing is nostalgic in itself. You know, that whole place feels nostalgic to me. Yeah.
You know, your full-time job as a teacher. Are you teaching music in your high school?
Yeah.
So these are the stuff you teach your kids, like the history of music and how music influences life and
that
analysis.
Kind of stuff. How to read, music, songwriting. We focus a lot on songwriting, and then there's practical development as well, like trying to put together bands and understand chords and structure and stuff like that. That becomes really important as well. For high school students, it's all that sort of development into either something that they can do as a pastime, or if they really want to commit to doing it as an artist, they have that opportunity to develop themselves through that as well.
Do you think technology's changed that? Because you see a lot of kids now these days, they're at home. Before you had to have all this gear in there, but now you've actually got instruments on your iPad or so. Like, do you think kids are either they're really grasping, they're really taking to it, or?
Yeah, some of them. It depends on what they want to do. To be honest, like a lot of kids just want to play instruments, and that's fine. You're just trying to build again that vocabulary around the instrument so that they understand a little more than like the average Joe who would pick up a guitar and play quite well and just be like, oh, but I don't know what this chord is. Like them understanding what the chords are called, or the tonality of a chord, what they're hearing, why that makes it sound so nice played alongside this chord, you know. Also trying to get them to create in their own mind what they want to hear. So like there's a lot of kids that they come in and they think that their good old 4 chords C, F, G and A minor are going to get them through music, and it's like, nah, you got to level up, especially when they're like, oh, I want to play Leave the Door Open. I'm like, cool, then you got to learn at least 6 more chords, mate, because there's far more happening here than those 4 chords that you've learned to play every song to. And that's the standpoint of it, is trying to develop that side of them and get them to engage in that way. But it's hit and miss, you know, like, to be fair, and I don't necessarily know what your mainstay in high school was, but there's certain things that, even though your teacher said it, didn't matter until years later, you know. So it's like me going, you have to practice. Like, you can't just suddenly become good at this. You have to practice. And they go, oh, no. And then heaps of my students that are now adults are like, I wish I practiced that. I don't even play anymore, but I wish I did. You know, like, I know if I had just stayed at this, and it's that thing of like, well, but it would have been the same thing. I'm sure there's something that I did that I wouldn't, that I would have been told and I didn't listen to. And if I saw that person again, I'd probably remember and then be like, man, I wish I kept at that.
I think if you stepped in that person's shoes, you wouldn't do the same thing.
I just run to the bathroom.
Oh yeah, no, let's do this.
Sorry, change this toilet tissue. Is that all right?
Yeah, yeah.
What was
No,
the
serious.
question? Oh, sorry, what was the thing? If we step
Oh.
into that person's shoes.
Yeah. I don't think you'll be doing the same thing.
This is another night in the car. It's another night in the car.
Pretty much. This is what we do.
Nice.
What did you mean by that, though?
No, I was thinking because you know how you said like when the kids get older they might say, oh, wish I wish I stuck to it.
Yeah.
Like I reckon if you were in that person's shoes, it wouldn't happen to you because I think your passion would just allow you to just do it anyway.
In music,
And music, yeah.
a lot of people don't realise, like, I was a really good runner, and I, ran for Auckland. Like, I was a actual long-distance runner.
Yeah, yeah.
But then I went to uni, and I wanted to participate in the things that my peers were doing.
Running wasn't one of them?
Just getting up in the morning wasn't one of them. So, yeah, like, I wanted to... It's not like I've never really been a massive drinker or anything, but I wanted to experience that life of going out. And this was back in the days where you had to dress up. Like nowadays, people could go in like shorts.
Yeah.
But yeah, then you had to have a collared shirt, you had to have dress shoes. So it's like I didn't buy all this stuff to never use it. You know what I mean? And as you still broke as a student, so you're like, I want to experience that, and I want to be able to go out. I want to go to a rave. I want to do the walk of shame at least once in my life. I want to say that I had to walk at 10 a.m. Like they can't do that anymore. Not really. You can't. I mean, I'm sure it was just common, like it was at, say, maybe 9 a.m. Like the sun's come up, and the people who are like walking. And where they've not gone home yet, know them.
No, that was us.
That was definitely us back in the day.
We're all going up to supper club at that time.
Oh yeah, supper club and chapel and
that's right.
24/7 Rising Sun.
Yes.
It's like yeah. And I mean there was that era of Opal.
Oh,
Road, like that was
a place to be.
That was a place to be.
Yeah, but it was it was really like an after hours bar. It was your last sort of thing before supper club. So that's that thing. Like it was a time to experience. Now you have to get ready. It's just all of those things. I couldn't run. I couldn't get up at 6 a.m, be ready to run, or 5 a.m, and be ready to run and train at 6 a.m. Because I was not at home at 5 a.m. Yeah, and it was also what do you call it? Just the fact that because you had that freedom, I never used to leave home until midnight or 1 a.m. And now people are getting ready at 7, let's get ready at 7.
Yeah.
We'll go over to this person's house and then we'll start clubbing at 9. And I was not even, I was still asleep at 9 p.m., so that I could wake up fresh. Yeah, but that's it.
How they changed the hours played a big part in that.
Yeah, that's right.
But in my coming up, I wanted to experience that. I wanted to be able to go to concerts, and I wanted to be, and I didn't have that level of commitment to that part of my life. It was easy in high school because you could create a routine around your studies, but once I left high school, I didn't have that for myself. But I had a transition point for music. I was a backing vocalist at 17, so I was learning the industry, the adult side of that. While I was still a teenager, and I still wasn't allowed in clubs and things like that, so I didn't have that distraction. Also, most music was, and still is, a nighttime thing, so it fit well into the schedule. Running didn't, training didn't. So I just didn't put it on the priority list. But I do wish I had kept it up in a lot of ways, especially because I think a lot of this is the most I can relate to sports, I guess, is you get older, and some of those old thrashings you gave your body, they come back in like pains, you know. But the ones who don't have them as often are the ones who kept going. You know, like their body is still resilient, like it's still able to handle all of that. But like sometimes I'm like, man, my left knee, I walk up a stair and I'm like, who hurt you? But I've done nothing, you know, like it's not like I've done anything super physical to make it hurt. So I know it's an old injury. And I'm just like, if I had just kept that level of training, that would never happen. Dancers talk about it a lot as well. There's a lot of writings about it, especially like when they stopped doing intensive dancing, they felt years later they started to feel like a train had hit them. And unfortunately, like in music, some of our greatest artists fell victim to that. There's Paula Abdul, Prince, Michael Jackson have all talked about how, Michael Jackson and Prince, other people have talked about it, how they medicated because they just had chronic pains. Prince had a back injury, and that's why he was taking the things that eventually killed him. You know, Paula Abdul had a car accident that then, from healing from it, she basically, like, her body she could still do everything and still remembered how to do everything, but created huge pains for her. And then she was on this medication and stuff, and then like what that manifested as was she was on American Idol and people thought she was out of it, but really she's just medicated painkillers, like she was in pain, just sitting, you know. And then you got Michael Jackson, and it was the same thing. Like he had all of these injuries from just years and years of putting himself through as a child, right up, putting himself through all of the strenuous stuff that unfortunately led to a type of medication that ended his life.
I think we're fortunate here in New Zealand to not have all those, you know, drug influences that those guys had, you know. And like you was talking about, like probably what we've got is just our age, you know, and what we did in the past, just catching up to us, whether it be physical or
we have a
staying up
drinking
late
culture, though. We have a drinking culture, and I won't say who. We have drinking and drugs, and I won't say who. You can kind of pinpoint some of them, but some of our big artists have suffered from that, and are, you know, like on one side they're icons of New Zealand music, and on the other side they're drunks or addicts, you know, like, and it's that sad thing of, we might not have it on the scale of like America, but we do have that issue, and it was encouraged, and it still is to an extent encouraged. Like, smoking's kind of going out the door, but everything else is sort of fair game. You go to a game, you know, have a drink, have a few beers, and then after the game, have a few beers, or whatever it is that you're drinking, you know. And in music, it's really easy, especially on that level, it's really easy to get access to things. So it's unfortunate when they say to not meet your heroes, you know, like for that reason. But it's really unfortunate when you see people in that state, and you realize that like you're going to now have to separate their music from the person, because the person will disappoint you. And if you were to accuse them, or if you were to say anything, how does that matter? Like, what's the price of milk here? They won't respond to it in the same way that you think they will. You're not going to save them. But it is rampant in a lot of industries, especially the music industry. That's a common thing as well. It starts off as, let's just have wind down drinks after a gig or whatever, you know. And there's not much education in music around how to take care of yourself in that way either. Yeah, so it's a sad reality, but you'll probably be able to pick some people that you've probably seen them out before once or twice and then realized, oh, I don't want to know that person. You can't, man, mean music or whatever like that, and then you're just like, oh. There are lots of people do that with sports stars.
Yeah.
The ones I don't know who they are, but somebody else will point them out and go, oh, bro, I just saw such and such. I'm like, okay. I'm like, but did you see such and such, or did you see like a version of them and a version that you didn't want to see of them, or that they didn't want you to see? And that's the reality with New Zealand is we have a culture. I just don't think we acknowledge it like the way that others do, but they have huge losses because of it that have now become like the poster child for don't do drugs because Amy Winehouse, and alcohol, or don't do this because Michael Jackson and Prince, like we don't have that. That's what we don't have in New Zealand. I can't really actually think of one now.
An example, eh?
No, I can't think of one. There probably is one.
Well, my boy who sold his album trophies.
Who's that? Oh, we won't say. But yeah, there are probably people. I can't think of one.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Did he really?
Yeah. It was.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
he
guess I
came
could
out,
just say
but
there's
he
not
did
many
come
though,
out and
eh?
acknowledge that he did have a problem, and I think what New Zealand should do is that really do not highlight it, but just making it, just let people know that these issues are there,
Yeah.
because a lot of people go into it thinking like
It's only in America.
it might be a bit naive and go, nah,
No, it's not here. It's only in
never
America.
happens here.
But that's here
Actually,
too.
there is a dark.
Well, it's that thing I do hear. Sorry, I do hear quite a bit. Like was what you said. It's like we're lucky we don't have that in New Zealand. Like, but well, we actually do.
Yeah.
And it's just it's not.
So exposed.
It's really not talked about again. That's what Fireflies was about. Like that whole thing. We don't talk about it. I can sit here and I could list a bunch of people that I know that have these issues. What's the point? I'm just listing a bunch of people. I'm gloating about what myself knowing things. Like it doesn't help them. But it is that thing. Like it goes. One of the first experiences, Lost Ones, the song you heard, is about like my experience through the industry, and it's meant to sound happy. It's meant to trick you into thinking it's a happy song, but the whole thing is about what made me terrified to record an album in the first place or to be a part of that side of the music industry, because I watched people change. As a backing vocalist and session vocalist, I got to work with a lot of artists that in New Zealand, if you know New Zealand artists, people go, oh, cool, oh, you did that, oh, that's mean, or you went on tour with them, and it's like, yeah, I get to say that. But then, and honestly, like, actually, just to put it out there, the artists that quite often get listed that I've worked with, I'm not necessarily talking about them, but some of them have experiences, and the things like the drug culture and me being at one point extremely churchy and just being like trying not to judge people for what they're doing and trying to keep my job without offending, and sometimes I felt like I was offending somebody if I didn't have a drink with them, when in reality I should have been just able to say no. But it's the intimidation of that, like, no, you're meant to have a beer, or you're meant to just do this, and then you sort of get into that pattern of this is what you're meant to do, and then I was like, no, I don't want that. I've had people I've worked with who've been told, your partner's ugly, say you're single. Like that level of you need to look like this. I've watched labels actually turn around and be like, you need to get rid of this person, this person, this person, because they look better than you on stage, or you need to stop being so flamboyant because you're gonna, what do they call it, alienate your female audience, or just like telling you that everything you write is shit. That's why you need a writer. And then like that sort of stuff causes people to self-medicate, causes them to go and get the drugs and go and get the alcohol. And then there's some people that just grew up in that culture and then they think they can carry it into it. But you get older and then you start to feel the wears and tears of things, and money doesn't always come from everywhere. Like at one point you might have had like a huge song and then nothing for years, but you're still trying to live this life over here. That was what Lost Ones was about, was watching people just go through the whole, I love you, you're perfect, now change everything about you so that you're nothing like what you were, and you can become completely lost in it. And I didn't want to be that, so I stepped away from music. I was like, nah, I'm not going to do music anymore. Like, it's terrified me. I got offered the record deals and things like that, and I was like, no way, because once I sign here, like, I become that, and I don't want to become that. And sometimes it was people I was working for, and sometimes it was people that were in association or on the same bill as the people I was working for. And because we're behind the veil, which is what, like, why Lost Ones sounds so happy, because we present this image of like, man, this is awesome. You want to be us. You want to, but really they don't. You don't. You want to, you would hope that somebody would tell you before that happens. Again, not everybody listens when you do. Sometimes you'll be like, hey, you got to be careful. Don't sign a contract. So many people have been told that,
Yeah.
And even in sports, don't sign a contract until you understand it. I mean, and then they go and sign that contract and they get shot.
It's something you hear all the time.
Yeah.
Here in America or anywhere in the world. Like, the corporates trying to control the artist.
Yeah.
The artist is a person that created, they're good at creating something, and they're putting it out there.
Yeah.
And then here comes a corporate trying to make money off it, because they say they've got the people to,
and they do.
They've got the people to, show you, to show your stuff to, right?
Yeah.
They do. But we have the internet.
Yeah.
We have YouTube.
Yeah.
Artists are doing their own sort of, making their own platforms to get out there.
What's crazy though is that while we do think that, and we all like to think that, all of the content is suggested for you. When you go to search something, more than likely your first 12 things that pop up are things on any platform are from channels that are playing or working the algorithm so that it specifically comes into contact with what you've searched. Then the next 5 will be suggested because you've searched that and those algorithm channels have come up. And then it'll take you about getting to the 20th search or the 20th panel down before you find something that you might be interested in. So generally, the way you hear about things is when people share directly from your platform. So for example, your podcast, you want to encourage everybody to share directly from your platform, whatever you're sharing from, so that the algorithm recognizes you guys instead of something similar to you guys that has more views, because then you will just get destroyed by that. And then that was what I was talking about with like a lot of the chefs who are trying to make, 5-star meals accessible to just the regular Joe Blow who has an oven and a stove. A lot of them quit simply because there was people making these like 5-minute hacks. And now there's like a channel that I came by on accident called How to Cook That, which is an Australian woman, and she's a food scientist, for example, and she's spending she started off as somebody was showing people how to make things, but but now she spends or invests her entire time into debunking these people who are playing the algorithm, showing you why that doesn't work, showing you how you're going to get third-degree burns because you've done this, or why these things happen, pointing out, like, here's my post of one of the most famous things she's done is the sugar glaze toffee. She pours it over a balloon, and then she pops the balloon and she turns it over and it's a bowl. Lots of people have seen that on BuzzFeed, 5-minute hacks on these things that are working the algorithm, and a lot of people don't realize that they stole that from her.
Oh.
So this is where she started to invest that, because she put that video up about 7 years ago, but it will always, if you look that up, it'll go to those ones. And it's the perception that you're getting what you want. And that's where clickbait came from, was people starting to like write what they think they want. They also put random tags in there. So they might be a tutorial, or like on how to make sushi, for example, and they put a random tag in there like Queensland supporters.
Yeah.
And then when you look up something for Queensland, and up pops the sushi video 5 panels down, and you're like, why am I getting sushi? And it's because they've worked the algorithm so that they're now like overpowering anything else. And then they've also put this random tag in that you are now a part of. And because you've searched that, you're now a part of. And then because you comment on it, you're actually feeding the algorithm so that they get more views. So the better way to do it would be to ignore it. But a lot of people don't know that.
So what you're saying is that after the artist defeats the corporate, they got to deal with the algorithm in the platform.
The corporate is the algorithm. This is the crazy like conspiracy, right? No, but that's the thing, is that corporations have realized that the only way they're going to make money is by not fighting the hurricane, going with the hurricane, and using it to their advantage. They have the money and the people to feed into these algorithms. So are you seeing things that are like, when you are looking for an independent artist, are you finding these independent artists or not? Because this is initially they got that wrong, and they tried to make a couple of people really, really famous. One of the most famous people that happened to was, there's a woman who did, it's like, oh, I wish I was a punk rocker with flowers in my hair. It's the thing, and they made her out to be this huge, and this like, oh, she's this independent artist on MySpace that's just magically been discovered. What actually was happening was the label was funneling money into false views and playing up, but it got discovered because the way the algorithms worked. But they learned how to play the algorithm. So there's a few tips that musicians should know when releasing music. One is give it time. Set up a campaign. Tell people about it. Tell more people about it. Pay for a little bit of advertising. There's no shame in that. Advertising or sponsoring your own work. It's your product. You want it out there. You would, in the old days, take an ad out in the newspaper. You know, like you would do those things. You would have flyers. You'd have posters that you'd put on a bloody lamppost. That's the same thing, you know, and you had to invest money in that. Even if your glue was flour and water, you still had to buy the flour and pay for the water. You know, like, so those sort of things, do that. Get people to talk about it. Make sure they share directly off your page or off your channel, so it's that it stays your content. Like, all of those things you need to make sure that you're aware of, because that's how corporations work now, and that's what sort of power they have. So when you have somebody like 660, for example, against an independent artist, you have a massive team over here that's investing a lot, because they have a product that people want, a brand that people want, and they will invest in that, which is why I think a lot of people suddenly come out and hate on them. But they started as that person over here who's the independent artist. They started as that. And then you have artists who are like Lord or Kimbra. Incredible artists. Great. Developed since they were teenagers by a label to become the thing you now know them as. You know? Like, it doesn't mean that it doesn't take away from the artistry. It doesn't take away from the person that they are or the music that they create. It just means that they had a larger team backing them. and putting them in touch with the right people. And if you are an independent whatever in whatever industry, you have to do the groundwork and you can't stop moving because the algorithm moves even when you're asleep. Yeah.
I feel like the only artist in the world that has transcended the corporate, even the algorithm. He's not a musical artist. He's a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
Dave Chappelle.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a guy that started from scratch, made it to mainstream, and just gave it all away for his art.
Dave Chappelle's an interesting one because he has admitted quite a few times to what he was willing to do and what he was unwilling to do. And he did have a large following at one point. A large team behind him at one point. And that large team is what he was smart about from what they generated was that he then took it in its own direction. But you quite often hear of people who are hot flashes in the pan and they just sort of like, you start to wonder whatever happened to them. So yeah, like Dave Chappelle, like kudos to him, but he did have a syndicated television thing, so he would have had a massive team at that time. And I think he's know more about it than I would, but like he's had that experience of I've watched a few interviews where he's talked about like what he's had to do and what he's unwilling to do. One of the most famous things he said was he's the only, I hope I get this right, he's the only comedian or black comedian who hasn't had to dress as a woman.
Yeah, we talked about that too. Yeah. Because if you look at all these guys, Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence, and they end up playing these roles that you know it's quite opposite to how they came into the game. So and I think someone put that up, and we talked about it in a previous podcast with someone else that we had, how the industry kind of changes, or they kind of they change people's perspective of them. After Eddie Murphy and they have these roles, it's hard to take them seriously again because they've kind of sold out in a way. That's what we were talking about when it came to that.
So it's I don't know enough about Dave Chappelle to muse about it. I'm just familiar with a few interviews he did, because basically from word of mouth, sometimes hearing it from a friend who's like, you need to check this out, But I did recently check out, one morning I was just like, man, I need to know what happened to Andre 3000 of Outkast, because he just disappeared. The dude's fine.
There's another guy.
That's right.
He's got hypersensitivity, hypersensitivity, and he's got social anxiety, and he just prefers to be on his own, and he's always preferred to be on his own, But like, it took him going to the heights to realize he didn't want it all in that format, and then he didn't have to. He didn't have to play that game.
I think with Dave Chappelle was more the corporates trying to control his art form, and offering this amount of money, but you got to do this first.
Yeah,
you can't do this. You can't do this anymore. You can't do that. But we'll offer you $50 million.
Yeah,
and he thought, nah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
I want to. I quit. You can keep your money. I quit because you can't play with my art like that. And then everyone thought he was crazy.
Yeah. There's a lot of stories with music as well. Same thing. And it's soul destroying. One person that did that in music is a guy called Terence Trent D'Arby. Not everybody tends to remember him unless you're from a certain age group. So like he was an influence on my upbringing. A lot of people know his first album, which was The Hard Line, according to Terence Trent D'Arby. They don't know the ones after that, like Neither Fish Nor Flesh. They know maybe songs here and there. The albums in themselves are great if you are not trying to hear another hardline according to Terence Trent D'Arby, which was a very 80s, late 80s R&B funk. The next album was almost psychedelic rock. Because he was a guy, like Prince, played every instrument on the albums, could do all of these things, had a huge love of music, and wanted to just be a musician and create, like, I want to make a psychedelic rock album. I'm going to go and do it. Then he went out and did it. Then his next album kind of like went further off into more experimental music because that's what he wanted to do. Then he came back with an album called Vibrator, which kind of went further into sort of soul and rock. And probably the most famous song from that everybody knows is Holding On to You.
That's when he was going for a blonde hair phase.
And then he disappeared. Because he changed his name to Sonata Maitreya, moved to Italy, and decided to just make albums on his own. Basically, what he wanted to do. No more playing up to the record labels and whatnot, trying to pin him as a competitor to Prince and Michael Jackson when he didn't want to be in the first place. He had no interest whatsoever in that. He just wanted to make music. Prince, on the same level, did the same thing as well. By like the 90s, he was writing the word slave on his head backwards so that in the camera was front, and he decided to go by the artist formerly known as Prince, which was the sign of the time sign, just until his contract ended so that he could do music on his own terms. He also didn't need to worry because he'd retained a lot of publishing, a lot of his writing credits. Money was going to generate. Every time Batman played, the Batman album belonged to Prince, you know. Yeah. But in order to save Warner Brothers, in order to save their investment, they barred people from being able to find the Batman album, so that they could save their investment, because part of that went to him.
You know, with all these lessons, like, how does that helped you in New Zealand music industry?
It didn't.
Okay.
Didn't. Look, I'm still doing it. No, it didn't, because...
But that shit that happens over there happens here, right?
Yeah, you know about it, but it still doesn't...
On the New Zealand level, it happens here.
I think that the generic thing that I can say is that you do kind of think, yeah, that happens there. And it doesn't happen here. And then it does happen to you, and you go, oh, crap. Like, what do I do now? You know, and you don't go, what did Prince do? Like, because I'm nowhere near on the same level as Prince ever was, you know? But it's that thing of, like, I learned not to sign a contract unless I knew what it meant. And I knew to make sure that I owned my publishing and to make sure that I owned... But I only just started doing this. But when I was working for songwriting teams, I was very to the letter about, you know, I had Chris Hockard, who's a music lawyer, write up a contract thing that basically said that I retained the rights to this, this, and this. But then when you work with bigger names outside of New Zealand, they have your little piddly contract is nothing compared to what they'll try and get you to sign, and you'll lose everything. You know, it happens. You've just got to be a lot more cautious about what you're actually signing in and who you're dealing with. And it sounds horrible to be distrustful, but it's more guarded. You know, be careful of what you're actually allowing in. And if something smells like shit and looks like shit, it's shit. That's it. Like, just say it. Just call it. But it's crazy. Like I said before about, you know, there's the person who's like, your partner's ugly, you need to appear single, because then more people will buy into that because they think you're available. That whole mentality in itself is sick. But what's sick is the ability that somebody has to make you believe that is right. You know, you go, oh yeah, that sounds right. Because it doesn't. Like, when you think about it, you know, like, you're like, but you have those experiences. I never personally did, but the thing is that I could have, And watching them do it, I was like, man, and I would have fallen for that. I would have been like, oh yeah, okay. Maybe not now, but I'm certainly not foolish enough to think that it couldn't happen, you know? So be on guard, learn your business, learn your trade, learn how things work and operate, because that's going to catch you out. And I'm so sick of hearing, especially New Zealand artists being like, oh, I just didn't know. It's like, as you just said, we have every example in the world, around the world, of those things happening. How could you not know? Like, how? You now have social media open to you. How could you have avoided every single interview, even just hearing a little bit about it, or hearing somebody say, bro, did you hear about blah, blah, blah? They got ripped off, and how did you not hear about it? You know, like, where were you living?
Yeah.
So that's a genuine thing. Like, you just got to be, if you're going to go into the music industry, if you're going to, like, I guess for you guys as well, podcasting, right? Like, if you're doing this, it's the same as what you would do in construction or medicine. You wouldn't just go start open heart surgery on somebody without actually having the qualifications to do it. Go and do your research, go and learn about it. Because if you do open heart surgery on somebody and they die and you're not a qualified doctor, there's a name for that. It starts with M and ends with Erda, you know? So, like, that's it. But that's the reality. It's like, yeah. I don't know why people still believe that they could just pick up a guitar and start singing and then just they're going to become famous. Like, it doesn't work that way. Never worked that way. You know, there's lots of people playing guitar and singing really well. But there's not enough people that, there's not very many people that have learnt the business and know how to maintain it. Michael Jackson, had one conversation with Paul McCartney where Paul McCartney was explaining to him about publishing, and then what did he do? He went and bought the Beatles. But what they don't realise is that when Eminem made one little crack at Michael Jackson, and did like a mockery, and actually in the context, the song was like mocking a lot of celebrities, but Michael Jackson was like, cool bro, I got you, and he went and bought his publishing. And Eminem was already like well into his career by this point, and he bought his publishing. So every time Eminem went on tour and performed a song, you know, like several of his songs, he had to pay Michael Jackson simply because he mocked Michael Jackson. And Michael Jackson's like, you're a young buck. Like, I'm going to go and buy your publishing now. I'm going to create an entire publishing company, which is actually what he did, to then get a deal with this record company that you're under, this label you're under, to buy your publishing. And it's like, that's it. You know, he learned his business. He was a kid when he learned it as well. And he came up through and he learnt what he had to learn in order to survive. And Eminem learnt from that experience as well. And he's done exceptionally well for himself, you know. But for whatever reason, we all start at this point where we think that we're just somebody's going to come across us and hear us rap or sing and just, and then you're going to become famous and everything's going to be fine. You know, but then we have TLC.
Oh, yeah, that's the perfect.
En Vogue.
Yeah.
Tony Braxton. We have all these perfect examples of people who got screwed over, how they got screwed over, and yet, again, that thing comes up again, like, even though somebody's told you, you don't necessarily listen to what they say, you know, but years later you go, oh man, I wish I had listened to them, or I wish I had paid attention to that.
Yeah.
But you didn't. So that's basically what's, you know, in the context of people like Dave Chappelle. He learnt his industry and then realised he didn't need it. And then walked away. Like, I can be a comedian and not have to dress as a woman, you know. And $50 million is all well and good, but what the hell are you going to do with $50 million? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of things you think you can do, but you probably only need a few million, you know, and part of that will be giving, well, at least for me, it would be giving to people. So, like, if I had $50 million, definitely my family's going with me in that. Some friends, some things that I wanted to help out. Like, what am I going to do with $50 million?
Well, he said no to $50 million back then, but now he's got those shows on Netflix for 60 million. So,
Yeah.
and he owns them. So.
Yeah. And what's he doing? Like, if you go and check what his philanthropy is, if you go and check how he set up his family, you'll find things. Sandra Bullock is one of those people. Like, I've heard of her things. Like, she's there's a whole, like, paper trail of her anonymously just giving money to different charities. And how the paper trail happened was because of a Catholic church, like a nunnery or an orphanage was like, no, we have to find this person to thank them. And they did this whole big, like, thing, and it wound back to Sandra Bullock. And then other people were like, hang on, we got something like this. And then it was Sandra Bullock, and just ding, ding, ding everywhere, you know? And then she's just like, I'm embarrassed. She never wanted that to happen. And it hadn't happened to her for so many years that she thought, like, she had a system going. And she's just giving her wealth away. There are reasons beyond having $50 million and being able to say that you have $50 million when you look at where people are investing it and who they're investing it for. Sometimes that matters more. But for me, I can't imagine what I would need with $50 million. I can imagine what I could do with $50 million, but I don't need it, you know? Be nice for my family, you know?
And friends.
But I automatically, that's where my head goes to, is who is going to participate in that. Not what am I going to spend with it. Because I don't really need it. Yeah, so I think, like, that's the thing with art as well. You know, Dave Chappelle creating art and going, I don't really need $50 million to create art. I can do that for free. I was doing it for free. I was doing it when I had nothing. It's the same with me for music. I was doing it when I had nothing. I make something now. And I have an album now that I self-funded, but I can appreciate the fact that I knew how to self-fund it, you know? Like,
that's a major achievement. I mean, to have a whole album out there for the world to listen to, you know, out there on Spotify. I know back in the days, you know, it was all about CDs and, you know, album covers and, you know.
I want to make a CD.
You know.
One day. It's expensive, though. You know, it's real expensive. Like, to make a record, to press a record is expensive. And you can't guarantee that you're going to sell it because people in labels, for example, have distribution deals. So they have people that are on a team to make sure that it goes to the people. I don't have that. I have whatever I have in my account. And if the funds do not allow, then no CDs, no records. You know, maybe later on, but it's nice to just have it out there in the digital platform as well.
Yeah, definitely. So what's coming up next few months for you, Victor?
Next few months. What do I have? So I've been back in studio doing quite a few recordings with just different people. So, like, as I was making the first album, I was already thinking about what the next thing was, which is huge for me. Like, that's a huge breakthrough because I only wanted to make an album initially. So it's been kind of like working with different producers, even giving some of the stems from my songs that are on the album to DJs or people who are in the electronic field to create remixes. That's been happening. Hopefully some festivals and live music. I actually went through I don't know if I can call it a depression, but I went through like a real sad phase once I released the album, which I didn't expect to happen. And I've learned now that it's really common it happens to a lot of artists where you've just invested so much time into this thing and now you have to let it go in some way, and it's kind of like really hard to part with it. So it's almost like you start mourning the fact that that whole process is gone. People call it post-tour blues when they go on tour, where they like start to miss the tour. I hated touring. Not because of the people, just because I need, like, personally, time alone to re-energize, and you don't always get that on tour. You have to constantly move. So I can't liken it to post-tour blues, because I was always celebrating the tour being over. This I didn't. I was actually just really lethargic. Like, I just wanted to go to sleep for 4 months and then wake up and then start promoting the album. You know, like, I just felt like if I had a little bit of time, because once that part's over, you have to keep going. So you don't even get to break. You just like, oh, now the album's released. Now I actually have to start promoting the album. Now I have to talk about the songs and all of that. And that put me into a lull for a few months where I was meant to be doing all of these projects and I was meant to be working with all these people, and I was just like, can we just take a break? And now finally that's all starting to happen again. But yeah, that took from, like, now we're in May, like near the end of May, and I'm only just starting to be like, okay, yeah, I'm okay. So that whole thing is live touring, finally just put together a live show, working with the band to create what that brand of live would be, hopefully get on some festivals, and have some of these external singles released as well that are not part of the album, that sort of carry over until I figure out what sound I actually want to go for on the next one. And I'm sort of in two minds about which direction I want to go for musically on the next one. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Man, that's so cool, man.
Exciting times.
Exciting.
I see. Slow for me.
Hey, Victor, man, thanks for coming on our podcast, bro.
Good.
It's been awesome to have you on and just have this conversation, because, man, I learned, you know, you're a guy that, you know, you have your full-time job, and, you know, you're doing, and you've got your music and your full-time job, like you're teaching music as well. So I think you wake up every morning and you're doing what you're doing. You're doing what you do.
Yeah.
All day. So
I'm running out of time all the time. Yeah. But I think we all do that, eh? You have your job, and you have your thing that you do. And you guys make a podcast.
Yeah.
now, but you're different, because you teach music. So you're teaching music and you're practicing music at the same time. So you're doing what you love to do every day, all day.
I don't always know. But yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and I hope that eventually one, I won't say which one, but you can guess, takes precedence over the other. At this point in my life, I'd be quite happy if it did. Yeah. So, but yeah, thanks for having me. And
Thanks a lot, man.
No worries, man.
appreciate it.
Thank you.